Hey truckers, here is part 5 of I Have a City in an Alternate World. Let's dive into the video. The girl's bald older brother involuntarily trembled when he saw Tangjin smiling at him. Tangjin seemed to be a demon in human skin when he saw his expression. The scene that had just happened seemed to have frightened him. Mr. Wan, I'm actually not familiar with them. Wan, yes, not at all. The girl's brother's heart was slightly thumping. He really didn't want to become one of the unlucky ones on the ground. His body was covered in whip marks, and then he rolled in the dust and screamed in pain. This was definitely a painful memory that he would never be able to erase for the rest of his life. The girl's brother was very sure that these guys must have been traumatized by fear. In the future, when they saw this kind of self-made triangular leather whip again, they would involuntarily avoid it. The girl saw her brother's cowering expression. Although his expression was very shameless, it did not mean that she did not have a protective feeling in her bloodline. Therefore, she took a step forward and faintly blocked her brother behind her. She said to Tangjin, "I'm very sorry for involving you in this dispute, but please don't hurt my brother. Although he often makes mistakes, he's not a bad person, Ingluo." 1. Tangjin waved his hand to stop the girl from speaking. He merely quietly looked at the brother and sister. A trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. The moment he turned around, he seemed to have felt a dangerous aura, but it quickly disappeared. Ordinary people would definitely not give him this kind of numb feeling. The intuition that he had gradually cultivated after fighting with monsters more than once made Tangjin convinced that he was not mistaken. "Are you pretending to be a coward to confuse me?" "Interesting, Ying." 1. Tangjin smiled as he threw the leather whip in his hand to the side and said, "Don't worry, I don't intend to do anything to your brother. After all, he didn't provoke me, did he?" The girl's brother quickly nodded, his face even revealing a trace of flattery. After Tangjin said this, he carefully sized up the brother and sister. This caused the pressure on the two of them to suddenly increase. The forehead of the older brother was already covered with fine beads of sweat. Seeing that the brother and sister appeared quite uncomfortable in front of him, Tangjin directly opened his mouth and asked, "It looks like you're in need of money." "It just so happens that I have a job that requires manpower. I've decided to hire the two of you. Your salary will be paid in American banknotes. Each person will receive $10,000 a week. How about it?" Upon hearing Tangjin's words, the eyes of the brother and sister immediately became heated. This was indeed a large sum of money to them. "May I ask what we need to do?" After the girl was pleasantly surprised, she hesitantly asked Tangjin. After all, the salary was really too high. She could not help but have some doubts about Tangjin's purpose in hiring the two of them. However, his older brother somewhat blamed his younger sister for being too talkative. He was afraid that he would miss the opportunity to make a fortune. However, after thinking about it, there was nothing wrong with asking clearly. After all, a high income meant high risk. It was not impossible for them to kill and set fire as long as the reward Tangjin gave was worth the risk. "It's just that I'm not familiar with this area, and I need to buy some supplies, so I need someone to run errands for me. The reason I hired you two is because I happen to meet you too, so you don't need to worry." After explaining the matter, Tangjin no longer paid attention to the brother and sister. Instead, he returned to his car, took out a cigarette, and started smoking. This cigarette was from Ivanov's inventory. It had a very spicy taste and Tangjin was quite not used to it. The girl's older brother came over and said to Tangjin, "Sir, we've decided to accept your employment. Now, please arrange the mission." Tangjin glanced at the girl's older brother and threw the cigarette in his hand over. He asked, "First, I need to know your name. Also, call me Mr. Tang. I'm Pargo, Mr. Tang. Discover new stories at nv/lbin.c/o. Alright, Pargo. This is the list of items I need to buy. Take a look and see if you can gather them in this city. Tangjin said as he handed over a piece of paper and waited for Pargo's answer. After Pargo looked at it seriously for a while, he raised his head and said to Tangjin, I've already seen it. The things on the paper should be able to be bought. Tangjin nodded. He turned around and entered the car. He took out a paper bag and threw it over. When Pargo opened the bag, he felt his heart beat wildly because there were 10 stacks of brand new notes in the bag, and they gave off a smell that intoxicated him. Mr. Tang, what are you doing? Pargo asked in a probing tone. Although he was short of money, the sudden appearance of such a large amount of cash in his hands made him feel very uneasy. Not to mention that the money was thrown to him by the devil Tangjin. Since you're going to help me purchase the supplies, I naturally won't let you pay for it out of your own pocket. This money will be the funds for the purchase. Remember, I only want the best. After you've gathered all the materials on the list, give me a call and I'll tell you where to send them. Tangjin looked at Pargo and continued, the rest of the money can be considered as payment for your hard work. As long as you work hard, I will definitely not treat you badly. Pargo nodded repeatedly, indicating that he would do a good job. Seeing this, Tangjin no longer spoke. Instead, he took out a smartphone from the bodies of the young men who had collapsed on the ground. He turned on the electronic kit and made a few slight modifications. This mobile phone immediately became a powerful superphone. Super strong signal, anti-positioning, anti-eavesdropping, network automatic tracking and positioning, etc. Tangjin simply did not look at the other functions in detail. In any case, he had long been used to the black technology in the application store. After asking for Pargo's phone number, Tangjin used the phone to call him. Pargo picked up his phone and looked at it, only to find that it was a hidden number. This number can only be dialed using your marked phone. Remember to call me when you're done. Don't let me down. Tangjin patted Pargo's shoulder and waved to the girl beside him. He started the car and returned to the Ivanovs' villa. Seeing that Tangjin's car had disappeared, Ivanov let out a long sigh of relief. He turned to his sister and asked, Natasha, where did you find this perverted guy? He almost scared me to death. Natasha glanced at her brother and said in a disdainful tone, How dare you comment on your boss like that? Do you believe that I'll tell him about it when I get back? He'll punish you on behalf of me and my mother. He'll use that kind of leather whip to give you a good beating. Pargo was shocked and quickly begged for mercy, but Natasha just ignored him. In the end, he was annoyed and promised not to say anything. Looking at the group of young men who were still groaning on the ground, the brother and sister decided to immediately leave this place and then purchase the supplies according to the list given by Tangjin. At this moment, the advantage of being a local snake could be seen. The brother and sister who drove the pickup truck only took one afternoon to gather the materials Tangjin needed. When they called Tangjin and told him that the mission was completed, Tangjin was quite surprised. In any case, it was a good thing to be able to gather everything. Tangjin gave Pargo an address and asked him to transport the supplies. After the brother and sister pulled the supplies to Ivanov's villa, Tangjin directed the two of them to help move the things to the basement. As expected, the two of them saw 3 bodies placed together by Tangjin. Natasha and her brother looked at each other and revealed an expression of as expected. However, out of Tangjin's expectations, the brother and sister did not show any panic. However, when he saw Pargo's hand rubbing his waist from time to time, Tangjin knew that the two of them might have already taken preventive measures. Tangjin was unconcerned about this and did not deliberately explain anything to the two of them. He merely smiled and said to the brother and sister who had finished moving the supplies, "Well done. I have one more thing to do. I will stay in the basement to prevent others from disturbing me. If you can help me guard this house for 3 days, I will pay you double your salary." Tang Jin's tone was very relaxed when he said that he wanted to increase the money. He had previously cracked Ivanov's hidden safe and got a lot of cash from it, so he didn't feel any heartache when he threw out money. When Ivanov was reborn and found out that his safe had been opened by Tang Jin with an electronic kit and the cash inside had disappeared, he didn't know if he would die again from heartache. Perhaps it was purely for the sake of money, but the brother and sister very happily agreed to Tang Jin's request. They did not mention the matter of the 3 corpses at all, as if this matter did not happen at all. The 2 of them started to guard the door for Tang Jin, not allowing him to be disturbed in any way. What an interesting pair of siblings. Perhaps they have a lot of interesting stories? Tang Jin looked at the map and saw Pargo take out the TT-33 pistol from his waist. After fiddling with it a few times, he put it back in. This was an old gun that seemed to have been baptized by war. Tang Jin believed that Pargo was definitely not its first owner. Natasha, who was sitting on the roof and basking in the sun, seemed to have a lazy and powerless expression. However, Tang Jin believed that as long as there was an abnormal situation, the sniper rifle placed next to the girl would erupt with life-threatening flames. Tang Jin looked at Natasha's exquisite appearance and really didn't dare to associate her with the female sniper who took lives. However, the facts had proven that the brother and sister that he felt something was wrong from the beginning were indeed not simple characters. It was as if fighting and killing were what they were best at, not acting. What exactly had these 2 siblings experienced? Why did they want to hide themselves? Why did they accept his employment in the end? Tang Jin wasn't interested in finding out the cause and effect of all these. He only needed the 2 of them to guard the door for him during the few days he was doing experiments. After arranging the materials that Pargo had bought, Tang Jin began to set up the altar in the basement for the simplified version of the soul lodging secret technique. According to Tang Jin's plan, this altar would probably be used many times in the future, so it had to be built to be strong and durable. In the following period of time, Tang Jin completely lived in the basement. The entire basement had also changed according to his modifications. It began to change beyond recognition. At the same time, a mysterious and solemn atmosphere gradually emerged. During this period of time, Tang Jin had teleported back to the other world and brought back the materials that Qianlong had gathered. With all the materials gathered, Tang Jin began the final construction work. At this moment, he was carving the core array of the soul hosting secret technique. The sharp purple lightning short sword in his hand was constantly waved, carving out strange lines on the hard ground as if he was cutting tofu. After drawing the lines on the ground, Tang Jin dug out dozens of nodes and then placed the brain beads in order. These brain beads would be used as the energy to maintain the operation of the array and could be used for a long time. Tang Jin took out the monster's blood from his storage space and carefully poured it along the path. He only needed to wait for the blood to dry up naturally before he could use the soul lodging secret technique. After finishing all of this, Tang Jin stretched his body and went to Ivanov's wine cellar. He picked a bottle of red wine and slowly tasted it. Ivanov's wine cellar was very large. In addition to a variety of red wine, the rest of the wine was a variety of brands of special spirits of the Ice Bear Alliance, which almost filled up half of the wine cellar. Tang Jin didn't know why Ivanov had stored so much hard liquor. However, when he saw these things, an idea suddenly emerged in Tang Jin's mind. At the same time, he couldn't wait to try it. He immediately got to work. He stored half of the strong wine in the wine cellar into his storage space and then teleported back to the tower in the other world. After greeting a few residents he met along the way, Tang Jin came to the room where the foundation stone was placed. Standing in front of the cornerstone platform, Tangjin first used his brain to exchange for 100 points, then began to leave a message on the cornerstone trading platform: "The purest spirit, only heroes can drink, a total of 100 bottles, each bottle is 20 points." Over 20 words actually required over 40 points, causing Tangjin to call him a profiteer. Who knew if there was someone controlling this cornerstone trading platform from behind the scenes? If there was, then the number of brain beads earned every year would probably be an astronomical figure that Tangjin could not imagine. He placed the spirits in his inventory around the cornerstone platform. When he stepped back, a thin layer of light spread from the cornerstone and enveloped the spirits. At this point, other than Tangjin, no one else was able to take out the liquor. Unless the transaction was completed or the transaction was cancelled, the items on the trading list would be protected by the cornerstone trading platform. Following the payment of the points, the information posted by Tangjin immediately appeared on the cornerstone trading platform. At the same time, it was signed as Holy Dragon City, Level 1 City. Tangjin nodded in satisfaction as he looked at the information that was slowly rolling on the cornerstone trading platform. He then left the room. This was because Tangjin didn't need to worry about the following matters at all. He only needed to wait until the goods were sold to check the points. The Holy Dragon City was currently undergoing a major construction, and every resident was busy. Tangjin walked around and found that he, the city lord, seemed to have nothing to do. Feeling a little embarrassed, Tangjin stopped walking around and teleported back to the basement of the Ivanov family's house. Tangjin checked the monster's blood on the circuit. The surface of the blood had already congealed. Tangjin estimated that based on this speed, he could perform the soul lodging secret technique at midnight. Since there was nothing to do now, Tangjin lay on the sofa, closed his eyes, and began to rest. The past 2 days of hard work had made him feel quite tired. Even with 3 times the physical fitness of an ordinary person, he couldn't withstand such an intense overtime work. However, although Tangjin's body was tired, he had never felt that it was hard. This was because he was working hard for his dream. Once he was engrossed in it, he would have a kind of joy in it. Vistnvelben.cm for new updates. He slept until around 10 a.m. Only when the work schedule in his subconsciousness, which was like a biological clock, woke Tangjin up did he comfortably stretch his body and stand up. He took out a bottle of mineral water and drank it before starting to check the monster's blood in the array. The blood had completely dried up, showing a purplish-brown color. It looked like he could completely perform his secret technique. Tangjin changed into his black cloak, then stripped Ivanov's clothes off and threw him into a blood pool inside the array. Immediately after, Tangjin stripped the body of the other young gunman and threw it into another blood pool. At the same time, he used a long tweezer to take out the brain pearl from the young man's brain. After the ordinary level 1 brain was removed from the young gunner's brain, it turned bright red. Under the light, one could see a faintly discernible human-shaped object floating in it. The corner of Tangjin's mouth was slightly lifted when he saw this. The abnormal phenomenon of this brain bead indicated that he had already successfully gathered the young gunner's soul. Otherwise, the young gunner's soul would have already turned into ashes at this moment. He took out the brains of the other gunner, and the results were the same. It seemed that both brains had successfully contained the soul that was about to dissipate. Tangjin didn't take out Ivanov's brain because he would be performing a secret technique on him later. Therefore, he couldn't move his brain. A brand new brain bead was stuffed into the brain of the young gunner in the blood pool by Tangjin. However, the runes on this brain bead were very special, completely different from the patterns on the brain bead that was previously taken out. Tangjin looked at the 2 corpses that were soaking in the blood pool. He looked at the time and decided to begin the soul lodging secret technique now. He slowly walked to the center of the formation and sat down in a spot surrounded by the monster's blood. Then, he began to chant something. It was an extremely strange language, with abrupt fluctuations in pitch. At times, it sounded like the melodious voice of a crane, and at other times, it sounded like the wailing of ghosts and gods. The strange rhythm seemed to resonate with the air, causing some of the items on the table to tremble slightly. After chanting this incantation for less than a minute, Tangjin suddenly clapped his hands and the brain nodes on the ground lit up one by one, emitting a faint blood-colored light. After all the nodes were lit up, the blood of those monsters also began to glow faintly. For a moment, the entire basement's floor, walls, and ceiling were all reflected with a blood-colored light. Tangjin stopped all his actions and quietly looked at the two corpses in the blood pool. Success or failure depended on this one move. He could not afford any mistakes. Tangjin's heart was also extremely nervous. Pfft! A young and strong body suddenly sat up in the blood pool. His eyes were wide open with a blank look on his face as he stared ahead. Coupled with the bullet hole on his forehead, the whole scene looked like a real-life horror film. A moment later, the young man finally inhaled a deep breath of air before exhaling heavily. After which, he turned his head and looked at Tangjin, who was wearing a black cloak. "Welcome back to life, my dear Mr. Ivanov." Tangjin's voice seemed to have come from heaven. However, it carried a devil-like temptation as it slowly reverberated in the basement. The young man in the blood pool was covered in dirty blood, and his naked body was exposed to the air, but he didn't care about it. He just silently felt the youthful vitality contained in his body, and then looked at his big belly that had disappeared, and then waved his arms hard. This body was so strong, yet so unfamiliar. After a moment of silence, the young man asked in a trembling voice, "I'm alive, I'm really alive again? Oh God, didn't you just shoot me in the head?" His voice trembled with excitement, but more than that, it was disbelief. Tangjin did not reply. He merely threw a mirror over and it landed in the blood pool. The young man immediately picked up the mirror and wiped the dirty blood off it. Then he saw an unfamiliar face with a bullet hole in the forehead. He was very familiar with this face, because it was this guy who had shot him in the abdomen. Slowly putting down the mirror, the young man, or rather, the reincarnated Ivanov, stood up from the blood pool. At the same time, he saw the body in another blood pool, which was his previous body. It was pale, bloated, and even a little ugly. Looking at his stiff body from the perspective of another body, Ivanov did not know how to describe the strange scene. It was not a sad scene, but a wonderful feeling that was almost beyond life and death. Ivanov slowly walked in front of Tangjin and took the blanket that Tangjin handed him. He wrapped himself up and soon felt a trace of warmth in his heart. He felt extremely comfortable and couldn't help but let out a groan. This feeling was really wonderful. Looking at the black-cloaked Tangjin, and then glancing at the basement that was beyond recognition, Ivanov had too many doubts in his heart that he wanted to ask. However, as the words reached his mouth, he lost the courage to ask, because the black-cloaked young man in front of him gave him too much pressure. Tangjin looked at Ivanov with a smile that was not a smile. After drinking a mouthful of red wine, he softly said, "Tell me the question in your heart, and I might be able to give you an answer." "Thank you." Ivanov thanked her and pointed at his own body. He asked in a careful and respectful tone, "What's wrong with my body? Is there really such a magical thing as resurrection?" Tangjin sneered and pointed at Ivanov. "I only helped you to change your body into a stronger one. As for whether or not you can be resurrected, aren't you a living example?" Ivanov nodded, hesitated for a moment, and then continued to ask, "May I ask who you are?" Tangjin finally waited for Ivanov to raise this question. He chuckled in his heart and said with a sacred tone, "I'm a lucky person. I was fortunate enough to have met a real god." Tangjin paused and glanced at Ivanov's expression. As expected, he saw a shocked and envious expression on his face. God ordered me to be his messenger in the world, to help him develop believers and teach me the divine spell of resurrection. In addition, God also taught me these abilities. As soon as Tangjin finished speaking, he waved his hand and Ivanov was shocked to find that his original body had disappeared into thin air. Then, Tangjin waved his hand again and his body appeared at the entrance of the basement. Tangjin's palms were placed together before he slowly separated them. An automatic rifle slowly appeared between his palms. He threw the rifle on the ground and raised his hand. 2 grenades appeared in his palm. Looking at Ivanov, who had fallen into a dazed state, Tangjin smiled and said, "Actually, this is just one of the abilities that the gods have given me. I can do this too." After Tangjin finished speaking, Ivanov was shocked to find that Tangjin's body had already disappeared into thin air. "Lord Oracle, where have you been?" Ivanov was a little flustered. It was a great fortune to be able to meet this oracle and help him be reborn. Now that the oracle was gone, he immediately became extremely flustered because he had more questions to ask. He hoped that he could also get the favor of the god. "No need to shout, I'm right beside you." Tangjin's voice sounded in Ivanov's ears before it once again appeared in the open space in front of him. "Now, do you believe me?" Feeling that his performance was almost done, Tangjin used a faint tone to open his mouth and ask. "I believe, I absolutely believe, and I have never doubted the words of the oracle." Ivanov immediately bent down. His tone was pious and firm, and he was speaking the truth. When he realized that he had indeed been reincarnated, a deep sense of respect and fear had already risen in his heart for Tangjin. Now that he had seen Tangjin continuously display miracles, he was even more convinced and devoted to him. Tangjin nodded upon seeing this. It seemed that Ivanov had already believed his words without a doubt. In that case, it was time to talk about serious matters. A solemn and solemn voice sounded in Ivanov's ears. Tangjin asked word by word, "Ivanov, as you have been reborn by relying on divine arts, are you willing to help the great god develop his believers in the world?" When Ivanov heard this, he immediately became extremely excited. He heavily knelt in front of Tangjin and replied in a decisive tone, "I, Ivanov, am willing to sacrifice myself for the great god and help him develop his believers in the world. Even if I have to face blades and axes, even if death comes, I will not be afraid. Don't worry. As long as you become a devout believer of God, you don't have to be afraid of death because you will be immortal." Tangjin said with a smile. What Tangjin said was not the truth, but he did not completely lie to Ivanov either. This was because as long as his soul was not exhausted, he indeed had the possibility of infinite reincarnation. This was the terrifying part of the soul lodging technique. If one's soul power was strong enough, it was possible to live forever. Tangjin could not help but sigh in his heart. Fortunately, the words that recorded the soul lodging secret technique were very unique. As a result, the person in charge of Black Rock City did not discover its value. In the end, he benefited from it. He had only managed to decipher the text with the help of the mysterious text translator that he had downloaded from the application store, making it possible for his grand plan to be realized. Once the original world was under his control, he would have billions of people in reserve. How difficult would it be for him to make a name for himself in the Luching world? Ivanov was his own experimental subject. There were more experimental subjects in the future. Tangjin wanted to use the people from the Ice Bear Alliance to do experiments. Once all the experiments were completed, Tangjin would carry out the soul lodging secret technique across the plane of space and transfer the soul of the original world's human into the body cultivated in the Luching world, completing a perfect rebirth. The source of all these plans was now tied to Ivanov. Ivanov immediately became excited when he heard that he would no longer have to worry about death. However, Tangjin's next words made him worry about his gains and losses. Find new Tories on NOV/E/L bin.com. Your current body doesn't belong to you, so the compatibility is very low. It will fail in about 3 to 5 years, and you will have to change to a new body. Ivanov was stunned when he heard this. He thought to himself, the source of the new body is not a problem for him, but is it a little troublesome to change every 3 to 5 years? He sneaked a glance at Tangjin and realized that Tangjin was looking at him with a smile that was not a smile. It was as if he had already seen through his thoughts. Don't worry. Actually, the solution to this problem is very simple. You can either wait for me to cultivate a perfect body, then you only need to change it once and you will never have to worry about the body failing again. Even if the body is damaged, there is a spare body to replace. It's just that this will take a long time, so you'll have to wait patiently. You can clone a body for yourself, but according to the current technology, even if this body is successfully used, it can only be maintained for about 10 years. In the end, it will still fail rapidly. When Tangjin said this, he looked at Ivanov and waited for his answer. Ivanov lowered his head and thought for a while before he raised his head and said to Tangjin, "You can continue to cultivate that perfect body, and I will find a way to recruit a group of top scholars to research and improve the body cloning technique." What do you think? What else could Tangjin say? He was very satisfied with Ivanov's tactfulness. In the basement, the conversation between the two continued. Ivanov paused for a second and asked Tangjin in a probing tone, "My dear Oracle, I wonder if you can give me a token to represent the existence of God. It will be more convincing when I spread the power of God among my believers." Tangjin glanced at Ivanov when he heard this. His eyes were very calm, but it made Ivanov immediately become more reserved. "You're right. Having a holy item will make the believers more convinced. I'll agree to your request." Ivanov's consideration was very thoughtful. Tangjin was silent for a while before gently nodding in agreement, which made Ivanov very excited. In fact, other than the magical abilities that Tangjin obtained from the application store, there weren't many items that could make people feel that they were magical. The purple electric short sword was one of them. However, Tangjin couldn't give it to Ivanov because it was a weapon that he could use. The cloak and leather armor were the same, but they were used by Tangjin to save his life, so he couldn't give them to Ivanov. After much thought, he decided that he could only give Ivanov the items he had obtained from the treasure room in Blackstone City. In the Tower World, it was not good for Tangjin to show these things to others. Otherwise, once Black Rock City discovered it, they would immediately lock Tangjin as the suspect of stealing the treasure. In the face of such a huge loss, it would be strange if Black Rock City did not take revenge on Tangjin. However, in the original world, Tangjin could take it out without any scruples and did not have to worry about Black Rock City coming to find him. After thinking up to this point, Tangjin waved his hand and a pile of swords and armor appeared out of thin air in front of Ivanov. Ivanov was shocked, but when he saw what these items were, he quickly stepped forward. Ivanov first looked at the swords and armor carefully, and then pulled out a scimitar. The more he looked at it, the more shocked he was. These swords and armors were the items that Tangjin had obtained from the treasure room in Black Rock City. According to Tangjin's guess, they were very likely to be the most precious demonic weapons in the Tower World. Other things aside, the appearance of these MO weapons was very cool. It was unknown what kind of metal the sword was made of, but it was covered with extremely beautiful patterns. It was natural, and it had a glazed texture. It shone with a faint light, and Ivanov's face changed color. At Tangjin's signal, Ivanov waved his scimitar at the sofa beside him. The heavy sofa was instantly split into two. One of the pieces fell to the ground, and the filling at the broken part was extremely smooth. "This Kasaya is too sharp." Ivanov was full of praise. He put the scimitar back and turned his attention to the armor. The shape of the armor was strange, and it was a decorative style that Ivanov had never seen before. It was wild and ferocious, like the armor worn by gods. The material used was similar to that of swords, so it must have had an amazing defensive power. In the original world where guns and explosives were rampant, cold weapons were naturally unable to resist these firearms. However, using them as honor guards to show the greatness of God was the best choice. Ivanov had already begun to fantasize about wearing a gorgeous robe and being followed by a group of guards wearing this kind of God-given armor and swords, and receiving the worship of those powerful people who were usually high and mighty. As he looked at Ivanov, who had fallen into a beautiful fantasy, the corner of Tengjin's mouth twitched. He coughed lightly and said, "Other than that, I'll give you something else. It's different from the weapons of the divine realm. It's a true sacred object." Ivanov's eyes lit up. He began to stare at Tengjin's hands with a face full of anticipation. Tengjin did not let him wait for long. A light suddenly flashed in the air above his extended palm. Immediately after, an incomparably resplendent and mysterious crystal appeared above Tengjin's palm. As it slowly rotated, runes continuously flashed. This crystal was one of the cornerstones that Tengjin had obtained from the treasure vault in Black Rock City. He had taken it out and handed it over to Ivanov. Ivanov's breathing became heavy in an instant. He could confirm with one look that this was definitely not something that could appear in the original world, but an item that truly belonged to the gods. Looking at Ivanov's eyes that were filled with incomparable desire, Tengjin grabbed the foundation stone and handed it to him. Then, he saw Ivanov piously lift it up with both hands. After carefully examining it for a long time, he slowly lifted it up with one hand and made it float slightly above his head. Ivanov was wrapped in a blanket and holding a floating cornerstone with a pious and solemn look on his face. He did have the style of a quack. Tengjin smiled when he saw this. He said to Ivanov, "Through this god's stone, the god can feel the prayers of the believers. When it reaches a certain level, it can become a temple bestowed by the god." When Ivanov heard this, he immediately straightened his back. When he looked at the foundation stone, the piety in his eyes became more and more intense. Tengjin's words weren't spoken randomly. He really intended to replace this cornerstone with a building foundation that was similar to a religious hall at an appropriate time. After that, he would try to see if he could sacrifice it to build a building in his original world. If he could succeed, Tengjin guessed that the relationship between the Luqing world and the original world was not simple. In fact, ever since the corpse race descended into the world of Luqing, Tengjin had some doubts in his heart. In the boundless world of Luqing, where did those wild building ruins with different styles come from? Where did the strange monsters come from? Were they born and raised in the world of Luqing, or were they like the corpse race and forcefully descended into this world? Or it could be said that they were affected by some mysterious power, which was why they appeared in the Tower world after their destruction. They were the missing parts of their respective worlds. It was impossible to rely on guessing for this kind of question. Even if Tengjin thought that his guess had some possibility, before he obtained the correct answer, a guess was only a guess and not a real answer. Tengjin came back to his senses from his thoughts. He thought for a while and told Ivanov the method of using the altar to perform a simplified version of the soul-lodging secret technique. It was actually just a simple incantation. Without this altar, Ivanov would not be able to complete the soul-hosting secret technique with only a short incantation. Therefore, only Tengjin could maintain the altar at a fixed time so that he could continue to perform the secret technique. Upto.dfrm no/v/e/lb I n.co/m. Tengjin took a sip of red wine and slowly stood up as he looked at Ivanov's bitter expression while memorizing the spell. The mission assigned to Ivanov had been completed. The next step would depend on his ability. However, Ivanov himself was not a simple person. In addition to the mystical item given to him by Tangjin, he believed that it would not take long for him to have a group of devout believers. The brother and sister outside are probably mercenaries to hide from the enemy. I've hired them temporarily, and they're both quite capable. Find a way to make them your guards, and it's best if they become your believers. Tangjin suddenly turned around and looked at Ivanov. You're not allowed to touch that girl, and you're also not allowed to touch any other man, understand? Ivanov revealed a wretched smile and quickly nodded. Don't worry, Your Excellency. I'll take good care of the woman you like. I'll kill whoever touches her. Tangjin did not say anything after hearing this. He only smiled gently at Ivanov before his figure instantly disappeared without a trace. Ivanov bowed to send him off. After a long time, he slowly straightened his back. His young face had a complicated expression mixed with piety, madness, and detachment. Tangjin, who activated the quantum stealth light curtain, did not leave immediately. Instead, he appeared in the hall on the first floor. At this moment, Pargo was lying on the sofa. He seemed to be very relaxed, but Tangjin had a feeling that if there was any movement, Pargo would be like a cheetah, quickly jumping up from the ground and injuring people. The truth was just as Tangjin had guessed. After he turned off the quantum invisibility screen and deliberately made a sound, the originally lazy Pargo suddenly jumped up from the sofa. He half knelt on the ground and used the sofa and coffee table as cover. His other hand quickly pulled out the TT-33 from his waist and aimed it in Tangjin's direction. Pa pa pa. Tangjin clapped his hands and looked at the guarded pars as he laughed. You're pretty good. If I were the enemy, I'm afraid you would have already fired. How could someone who can find cover, determine the target's location, and quickly aim at the target be scared by my words? That's why I'm saying that you guys were prepared to put on a show for everyone to see, but your previous performance was too much. Pargo stood up from the ground, his pistol hanging at his waist as he looked at Tangjin and said, I felt that something was wrong since you started talking. Hiring me and Natasha with a high salary for no reason is unreasonable in itself, so we thought that you must have a purpose. Now can you tell me, what do you want from us? Tangjin walked to the sofa and sat down. He looked at Pargo with a smile that was not a smile and said, What am I doing? Of course, I'm hiring you. Although I've never seen you in action, I'm still sure that you and Natasha are very good at fighting, so I used the excuse of hiring you as an excuse to test you. In the end, you agreed, so we have the basis for cooperation, right? Pargo's eyes were fixed on Jin Tang. The man in front of him was exuding a terrifying pressure. Ordinary people might not be able to feel it, but Pargo, who had been in the battlefield for a long time, could clearly feel it. This pressure made him feel like pulling out his gun at any time. His heart was beating wildly and his nerves were tight, almost driving him crazy. How can you be so sure that I'll accept your employment? What if we choose to refuse? Pargo's butt was half leaning on the other sofa, trying to relax his body. If he kept on being so nervous, he would definitely break down. Tangjin smiled when he heard this. He looked at Pargo, who deliberately revealed a relaxed expression, and said, You won't refuse. People like you, once you sense danger, will never allow it to develop to a level that threatens you. So, you will choose to advance instead of retreating, or carry out a preventive attack, or try to resolve the danger. Since I've given you a chance to get close to me, you will naturally use it to determine if I have any ill intentions. If you were sure that I wanted to harm you, I'm afraid you would have already taken action. After all, you've brought your weapons, haven't you? Tangjin smiled as he explained. At the same time, he picked up a bronze sculpture on the table and gently fiddled with it. After that, you saw that I showed the 3 corpses without any restraint, and I didn't show any malice, so you judged me as a friend and not an enemy. You took the opportunity to accept the mission, not wanting to be on bad terms with me because of this matter. Besides, Ingluo, even if you refuse the job, do you think I can't do anything to you? After Tang Jin finished speaking, he gently broke off the bronze sculpture. The hard sculpture was actually like rotten wood as it was easily broken into many small pieces and scattered on the ground. Pargo's pupils contracted as he stared at the solid bronze sculpture for a while. Then, he looked at Tang Jin with an ashen face and asked, "Can you tell me how long you've been watching us?" Tang Jin leaned back on the sofa and looked at the depressed Pargo. "I just happened to meet you and your sister, and I happen to need people like you to help me with things. Everything is just a coincidence." Pargo let out a long sigh of relief, and his expression finally relaxed. He laughed at himself and said, "It seems that I was being overly sensitive before." "Then, Mr. Tang, may I ask if you spent money to hire us just to guard the door?" "Of course not. You need to protect someone to get out of here, because a battle is about to take place here. As for the salary, it can be calculated separately. He will pay you." Tang Jin pointed to the exit of the basement. A young man was currently walking out from inside. However, what made people feel puzzled was that this young man's forehead was wrapped in a circle of gauze, and there were faint bloodstains seeping out. Pargo looked at the young man's face, and a shocked expression appeared on his face again. If it wasn't for the fact that it was broad daylight, he would have thought he had seen a ghost. Wasn't this one of the 3 corpses in the basement? How did he come back to life? Pargo was sure that he had seen it very carefully at that time. The young man had been shot in the forehead by a pistol, and he couldn't be more dead. Livor mortis had also appeared on the body, which further proved that he had been dead for a long time. Therefore, Pargo was sure that the young man with livor mortis on his neck and the back of his hands, and gauze on his head, was one of the 3 bodies. God, what was going on? Even though Pargo had killed countless people, he was still terrified by what was happening in front of him. The dead were not scary, but it was very scary to see a dead person come back to life after a few days. All test NOVL on novelben/.cm. Tang Jin ignored Pargo, who was about to lose his mind, and said to Ivanov, "Let Pargo take you away now. Otherwise, I might have to change your body." Ivanov was stunned. Just as he was about to ask Tang Jin why, he suddenly heard rapid gunshots from outside. "There's no need for me to explain this time, right? Because we've already been surrounded." Tang Jin shrugged his shoulders and helplessly said. In fact, before Tang Jin walked out of the underground room, he had already discovered this group of armed gunmen through the map. Therefore, he did not directly leave. "Damn it!" Ivanov waved his fist and looked at Tang Jin. "It must be the fire fist, but how do they know I'm still alive?" "They're looking for me. As long as we check the surveillance, they can trace the area where the car I was driving was in. Besides, they didn't see your body, so it's only natural that they surrounded your lair," Tang Jin explained. After which, he impatiently waved his hand and said, "Hurry up and get Pargo to take you away. By the way, do you need to call your sister?" At this moment, Pargo took out a submachine gun from his backpack in the corner and shook his head at Tang Jin. "Natasha will leave after the cover is done. Damn it, I wanted to avoid my enemies and live a quiet life, but why did I pick up a gun? Don't worry, you won't regret your choice today." Tang Jin patted Pargo's shoulder. He raised his hand and took out an automatic rifle from under his cloak. Then, he ran upstairs like lightning. "Can you tell me how he did it? Magic?" Pargo looked at Tang Jin's back in a daze. His mind was still recalling Tang Jin's actions just now. His hand clearly didn't reach under the cloak, but a rifle appeared out of thin air. Moreover, it didn't look like there was a rifle hidden under the cloak. Otherwise, he would have noticed the abnormality when Tangjin was walking in the bedroom. Ivanov heard the rapid gunshots coming from outside and urged Pargo, "He's a big shot, you'll never be able to guess. I wouldn't be surprised even if he took out a T-34 tank from under his cloak. Buddy, can we leave now? Don't worry, I'll pay you a large sum of money," Ivanov urged. He had already died once, so he knew how precious life was. He did not want to be beaten to death again. The feeling was too painful. Tangjin, who was carrying an automatic weapon, had just entered the second floor when he saw Natasha, who was squatting in the corner and sniping outside the window. At this time, the beauty looked like a calm and cold warrior. Her beautiful face was no longer as delicate as when they first met. Her movements were clean and crisp, and lethal bullets would shoot out from her muzzle from time to time. After seeing Tangjin, Natasha pouted her small mouth and heaved a sigh of relief. She glanced out of the window again and then looked at Tangjin. "It seems that you have to pay more, my dear Mr. Tang. It's reasonable to be paid according to your work." "No problem." The corner of Tangjin's mouth twitched into a smile when he heard this. After his gaze caught a human figure flashing outside the window, he did not hesitate to raise his gun and shoot. With his powerful strength and abnormal reaction speed, coupled with the assistance of a super shooting assistant, Tangjin only needed one shot to blow up the head of the gunman. Natasha watched her target fall and pulled back the sniper rifle that was half extended. Her beautiful big eyes glanced at Tangjin and praised, "Your aim is not bad." The window was smashed by the crazy bullets. The two of them changed to another window. Before Natasha could observe, Tangjin stuck his gun out and fired 3 shots in a row without looking. When Natasha heard the screams and the sound of heavy objects falling to the ground, she knew that Tangjin's 3 shots had hit the target. Moreover, more than one person had been hit. This exaggerated shooting method made Natasha frown slightly because she couldn't understand how Tangjin had done it. This feeling made her very uncomfortable, because not understanding it meant that it could not be cracked, making her feel like she had lost control of the battlefield. After Tangjin confirmed that there were no more gunmen near the window through the map, he immediately stood up and began to search for the enemy with his gun. He quickly found an enemy hiding in the corner and turned his gun over. However, he didn't expect that Natasha's first shot would be slightly off. The gunman was so frightened that he wanted to lie down to avoid the bullet, but his head was blown off by Tangjin's next shot. After seeing this scene, Natasha pouted slightly and then quickly moved to another location. When Tangjin saw that 4 or 5 gunmen had aimed at this window and started shooting, he immediately squatted down. With the view of the map, he almost emptied a magazine. After making sure that the gunmen were all killed, Tangjin turned around and moved. However, he found that Natasha was silently looking at him. After staring for a while, she said, "Big brother sent a message saying that they have left safely. We can leave now." Tangjin nodded. The two of them immediately got up and prepared to rush to the first floor. However, they discovered that 2 gunmen had already rushed into the hall on the first floor and were preparing to rush to the second floor. Tangjin and Natasha looked at each other. Each of them was responsible for one target and quickly killed the 2 gunmen. However, at this moment, another 7 or 8 gunmen rushed into the hall, and there were also people outside who were stationed at the front and back windows with guns. There were about 20 gunmen surrounding the Ivanov villa this time. Other than the ones killed by the 2 of them, the rest were almost all gathered here. Natasha glanced at her magazine and wiped the fine beads of sweat on her forehead with some annoyance. She shook her head at Tangjin, pursed her lips and shrugged. "I didn't expect to encounter such a scene, so I prepared very little ammunition. In fact, I'm out of bullets." Perhaps it was because Natasha had been on the battlefield for a long time, but when she talked about this almost devastating thing, her expression remained unchanged, as if she were just chit-chatting. Tang Jin threw his rifle and said with a smile, "What a coincidence, I was just about to say the same thing." Natasha looked at Tang Jin's frivolous appearance and angrily punched him. Then, she took a small folding knife from her waist belt. From the looks of it, she seemed to be going for her last fight. However, Tang Jin did not think that this girl had any hope of winning when faced with 7 or 8 strong men holding automatic rifles. Perhaps she just didn't want to give up the last chance. After all, if she fell into the enemy's hands, she would probably suffer a terrible torture that was worse than death. Tang Jin believed that those gunmen would definitely not have any mercy when facing a beautiful captive like Natasha. "You wait here, I'll go deal with them." Tang Jin didn't take out any more firearms from his storage space. Instead, he took out the purple electric short sword. Without waiting for Natasha to stop him, he had already rushed down the stairs like lightning and met the gunman who was preparing to go upstairs. By the time the gunners saw Tang Jin and subconsciously pulled their triggers, his purple electric short sword had already drawn out a life-reaping edge, blooming a blood-colored flower of death in the middle of the gunners. Hot blood shot into the air from the gunmen's chests and necks, and some of them were even heads and limbs that were sent flying. The bullets that went out of control passed through the flowers of death and shattered the floor-to-ceiling glass on the first floor. When Tang Jin passed through the middle of these gunmen and quietly stood in the middle of the hall, the blood that was wildly gushing out from the 7 to 8 corpses had already dyed the stairs completely blood-red. After which, it turned into a small stream that slowly flowed on the ground of the hall on the first floor. "God, are you Superman?" Natasha exclaimed excitedly and pounced over. She looked at Tang Jin with an extremely admiring gaze. At this moment, the brave and calm beautiful sniper seemed to have transformed into a little girl who saw the superhero in her heart. She no longer had any reservations. The killing scene that had just happened was completely comparable to the classic scenes in super blockbusters. Even a female sniper like Natasha, who was used to seeing life and death, could not help but be intoxicated by it. After Tang Jin saw Natasha's expression and movements, he felt a little proud in his heart. Just as he was thinking about how to respond to Natasha, he saw a gunman raise his rifle and pull the trigger at Natasha from the corner of his eye. "Be careful." FIDDEU UPTS on NOV/E/LN.com. Tang Jin roared and blocked in front of Natasha. His back faced the bullets, and at the same time, the purple electric short sword flew out. Gunshots had already sounded. Tang Jin only felt as though his back had been struck 4 to 5 times by a heavy hammer, causing him to nearly vomit blood. This black cloak saved his life at the critical moment. It blocked all the bullets, but the impact of the bullets was greatly reduced. This was also one of the shortcomings of the black cloak. The gunshots had stopped. The gunner had a purple electric short sword in his chest and was limply falling to the ground. "Tang Jin!" Natasha exclaimed. She carried Tang Jin and dragged him to the sofa. She had just seen with her own eyes that the bullets of the gunman had landed on Tang Jin's body. The thought of this man blocking a fatal attack for her made Natasha's heart beat wildly. She never owed anyone anything. Someone saved her life, so what should she do to make it even? "Don't move. How are you feeling now?" Natasha looked at Tang Jin's pained expression and wanted to check if his back was injured. At this time, she had already determined that Tang Jin should be wearing a heavy bulletproof vest similar to dragon scale armor. Otherwise, if he was shot by a rifle at close range, his chest and back would have bled under normal circumstances. The body of flesh and blood was extremely fragile in front of such a killing weapon. "No problem, I'm just a little uncomfortable. Let's evacuate immediately." Tang Jin waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. Then, he struggled to stand up. After Natasha saw that he was indeed fine, she bent down to pick up a rifle and walked out of the door. After 2 gunshots, Natasha leaned in and slightly turned her head, signaling Tangjin to continue walking out. The courtyard of the Ivanov family's house was very quiet. The bodies of the gunmen were scattered on the ground, and the air was filled with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Even after the two of them got into the car and left, there were no more gunmen. They must have been killed by the two of them. Tangjin sat in the front passenger seat. Natasha drove while contacting Pargo. From time to time, she would turn her head to look at Tangjin, her eyes full of concern. The car finally stopped in a manor, and Ivanov and Pargo took the two inside. At this time, Tangjin had already taken the IV ointment and his body was no longer in any danger. After the secret conversation with Tangjin, Ivanov began to mobilize his own forces with a furious expression on his face. With the cooperation of Pargo, he was ready to retaliate against the Fire Fist, intending to eliminate the Roots in one go. Tangjin did not participate in this matter. Since Ivanov did not ask him for help, he naturally had the confidence to do so. If the dignified head of the Firearms Bureau did not have some secret and violent means, he would have been thrown into the river to feed the fish. In the bathroom, Tangjin turned on the tap and allowed the water to wash his strong and straight body. His back was full of bruises, which were the traces left behind by bullets. However, Tangjin did not care about this. Instead, he was thinking about the various miscellaneous matters regarding the Holy Dragon City. The bathroom door was gently pushed open. A pair of snow-white long legs stretched in and slowly walked to Tangjin's back. After which, they gently hugged him. "This is Yingluo?" Tangjin did not turn his head as he softly asked. "You saved me, so I'll repay you with my body. This way, we don't owe each other anything." Natasha's voice sounded, but it seemed like she was talking about a deal, which made Tangjin feel very uncomfortable. In fact, the original purpose of protecting Natasha was to let her play the role of a saint beside Ivanov. Of course, if he had the opportunity, Tangjin would not refuse to kiss her. "You like my body, right? Don't deny it, I can feel it from your eyes. Come, I belong to you tonight." Natasha's mumbling voice sounded again. Her finger brushed over the bruise on Tangjin's back and gently kissed it. Tangjin's body suddenly tensed up. He only relaxed a few seconds later. As he felt the soft feeling transmitted from his back, Tangjin immediately felt that he was already on the verge of exploding. Tangjin slowly turned around and looked at Natasha's nearly perfect body under the impact of the water flow. He could no longer control himself and fiercely hugged her in his arms. His delicate snow-white skin and strong bronze skin intertwined together as he crazily and violently explored her body. A few days later, the weather was unusually clear in the morning. A few hundred meters away from the Ivanov family's house on the road, Tangjin's figure appeared out of thin air. At this time, he had already changed into ordinary casual clothes. He seemed like an ordinary passerby as he began to leisurely stroll. As Tangjin walked, he thought about how to make use of Ivanov to bring him more convenience. Just last evening, Ivanov had killed his biggest enemy, the Fire Fist, and became one of the big bosses in this area. If this had happened in the past, Ivanov would have been so excited that he would die. However, since his rebirth, he had become the spokesperson of the Oracle in the world. His vision had long become extremely lofty. How could he be fascinated by such a small power in front of him? With Ivanov's protection, the brother and sister naturally no longer had to worry about being hunted down by their enemies, but they still had to pay the price. Natasha agreed to be the saintess and put on a white robe that was specially tailored to match her perfect figure and appearance, making her look extremely holy. Ever since that crazy night, she had kept a certain distance from Tangjin. It was as if it was just as she had said. She was purely repaying Tangjin and did not want to owe him too much. Pargo became the captain of Ivanov's guards. Together with 6 other strong men wearing the demon weapon armor that Tangjin had taken out, they guarded Ivanov, who was dressed in a gorgeous robe, as guards of honor. At the same time, they also cooperated with the armed bodyguards and began the plan to develop believers. From Tangjin's point of view, the more Ivanov acted this way, the more benefits he would obtain. Ivanov could not only provide him with an experimental body for the soul-watching secret technique, but he could also help him expand his influence in his original world. In the future, he could also help him obtain many weapons and firearms that he urgently needed, even heavy weapons that could destroy cities. Although choosing Ivanov was a spontaneous decision, the entire process and the results achieved had greatly exceeded Tangjin's expectations. Therefore, he was extremely satisfied. Tangjin, who was in a good mood, went to the nearby market and bought a whole car of wine and food in one breath. When he paid the bill, he used the money he obtained in the Luching world. These banknotes might have belonged to the original world, but unfortunately, they disappeared or were destroyed because of the disaster. However, they were strangely restored in the world of Luching. Tangjin had only brought them back to the original world. After the hired car unloaded the goods into the forest, Tangjin watched as the driver with a strange expression left. He immediately put all the food into the storage space. His own city had just been built, so he had to celebrate with the residents. The transmission was activated. Tangjin returned to his own room in the tower after his vision blurred. He stood by the window and looked around before walking in the direction of the kitchen. At this moment, the residents were all busy with their own tasks, so there were not many people in the building. After Tangjin greeted the woman in charge of the food in the kitchen, he got the woman to open the door of the food storage at the side of the kitchen. Then, Tangjin released all the food he had brought along this time. Looking at the room filled with food, Tangjin smiled in satisfaction. He turned around and ordered the woman to call Murong Ziyan over. Not long after, Murong Ziyan rushed over. When she entered the kitchen warehouse and saw all kinds of alcohol, chicken, fish, meat, and eggs on the floor, she was slightly stunned for a few seconds. Then, she looked at Tangjin with a questioning look. Tangjin pointed at the food in the warehouse and told Murong Ziyan that these were ingredients for the celebration. "Isn't this kasaya a little too extravagant?" Murong Ziyan asked in disbelief. Even though she didn't have to worry about hunger after following Tangjin, she still couldn't accept the fact that she had to use up so much precious food at once. "Call a few more people to take care of the food. Since Luching has been built, we should celebrate with the residents." Tangjin indifferently waved his hand, indicating that Murong Ziyan didn't need to feel heartache. There was a saying that an emperor does not lack hungry soldiers. Letting the residents eat a meal that they had never eaten before was definitely the embodiment of the benefits of the Luching. While the residents were shocked, they would definitely be grateful to him, and it would increase his prestige. Murong Ziyan obediently nodded her head. Not long after she left, she returned with a dozen women. They used rattan-woven baskets to separate the food and carried it to the dining room to prepare for cooking. Not long after, Murong Ziyan came back with a troubled expression. She told Tangjin with some bad intentions that the women did not know how to prepare the food. Tangjin had overlooked this point. After all, they were in two different worlds. There were a lot of food that they had never seen before. He followed Murong Ziyan to the kitchen and began to guide the women on how to cook the food. Previously, he had bought enough seasonings to cook these dishes. During this period, he even personally cooked 2 of his own specialty dishes. The only difference was that he used to use plates to store them, but now he used large basins. The news that City Lord Tangjin was preparing to hold a celebration quickly spread among the residents. Tai Sing and Qianlong even specially came over to check and confirm. When they saw the plates of delicious food, the 2 of them drooled. Taking advantage of the chef's inattentiveness, the two picked up a crispy roast duck and ran, making Murongzian so angry that she chased after them and scolded them. Preparing food for more than 400 people at once sounded very scary, but in the eyes of these chefs who made big pot rice, it was not a problem at all. Several women and the helper they called later, everyone was busy cooking and frying. In just a few hours, all the required food was ready. After sealing off all the entrances to the 3 lines of defense, they sent people to take turns to guard. The remaining residents were all called over by Tang Jin and gathered in the open space in front of the tower. More than 400 people sat around 10 long tables that had been temporarily built. The tables were filled with delicious food that exuded a strong aroma. This was the first time the Holy Dragon City's residents had had such a meal since they were born. The alluring food made them drool, and the wine in their cups filled them with curiosity. At the same time, they were secretly grateful to the city lord who had given them the status of a resident and brought them an unforgettable meal. After Tang Jin saw that everyone had taken their seats, he raised the wine glass in front of him and looked around at everyone. He slowly opened his mouth and said, "Today, we've all gathered together to taste good food and to celebrate the successful establishment of our Holy Dragon City. From now on, we all have a home that belongs to us. From now on, we and our descendants will all live here. I hope that everyone will work together to upgrade Holy Dragon City to the most powerful city in the endless wilderness. Cheers!" Tang Jin raised his head and finished the wine, showing the empty cup. All the residents followed suit and shouted loudly. They raised their wine glasses together and drank it all in one gulp. Long live the city lord! Protect the Holy Dragon City, even at the cost of 10,000 lives. Good wine! Read latest OVLS at nv/e/l/buy.com. Oh, is this wine? Why are you so confused after drinking it? The fruit juice is so good, so sweet. Is this called beer? It tastes weird. It's like horse urine. Do the big shots drink this? TSK, their taste is really weird. The discussion at the table was endless, but it didn't affect everyone's eating speed. They had never eaten these beautiful dishes before, and they felt that they were really delicious. As a result, the dining table was filled with residents who were chewing and grabbing food with their mouths and eyes fixed on the food. They were afraid that the delicious food would be gone if they were slow. In fact, the residents didn't need to worry at all because Tang Jin had already prepared sufficient food. It was enough to last them until they couldn't walk. Tang Jin, Qianlong Taiseng, and the rest sat at the same table. Murongziyan sat beside him. Other than them, Li Sha and the others were also present. Compared to the other tables, where the residents were gobbling down their food, this table was much slower. The main reason was that they knew there was enough food, and they had already visited the kitchen before dinner. For example, Murongziwe, that little girl, was still holding the chicken leg that she had stolen and was gnawing on it with relish. Big Bear, who was sitting on the ground, was holding an entire turkey and eating with a smile. Qianlong and Taiseng were both holding a bowl of high alcohol each, and their faces were flushed red as they competed with each other. However, when it came to drinking, Qianlong was clearly no match for the muscular Taiseng, and he was already starting to get dizzy from the alcohol. Tang Jin didn't drink anymore. Instead, he was drinking with Murongziyan and the others. At the same time, they were discussing something in a low voice. Li Sha, who was watching from the side, had an unnatural expression on her face. However, she only drank her wine in silence. There were soldiers in charge of security among the residents. After eating and drinking to their fill, they stood up and went outside to replace their companions who were standing guard. While they were celebrating, they kept their guard up. After all, this place had already become their home. There was no need for Tangjin to specially emphasize it. Every resident would also take the initiative to protect this place. After the noisy banquet ended, Tangjin announced that there would be a half-day holiday. After everyone cheered, they returned to their residence to rest. Tangjin went to the room where the foundation stone was placed by himself. He wanted to see if the hard liquor that he had previously announced for sale had already been sold. As soon as he entered the room, Tangjin knew that the hard liquor had been sold because the floor of the entire room was clean and not a single bottle of wine was left. After sticking his identity card on the wall of the Cornerstone trading platform and taking it off, Tangjin realized that there were indeed 2,000 points on it, which was equivalent to 2,000 level 1 brain beads. At the same time, a message suddenly appeared on the stone wall of the Cornerstone trading platform. Tangjin was very curious when he saw someone leaving a message on the platform. He immediately clicked on it to check. "I'm Hammer from the Holy City of Dwarves. Your wine is very good. I want 1,000 more bottles." His words were straightforward and in line with the dwarves' style that Tangjin had heard of. Tangjin suddenly came to a realization after reading the message. It seemed that his strong wine had been bought by this dwarf called Hammer. After tasting it, he felt that it was not bad, so he left a message for Tangjin to place an order. This was good news. Tangjin naturally wouldn't neglect such a rich and forthright customer. He immediately returned to his original world and planned to buy another batch of hard liquor from the market. Unfortunately, he couldn't find the brand of spirits in Ivanov's house even after searching the market. Helplessly, Tangjin had to call Ivanov. After the call was made, Ivanov quickly picked up the phone and asked Tangjin in a very respectful tone what instructions he had. Tangjin's face was a little red. In Ivanov's eyes, he was a god's messenger. He had such a powerful identity, but he specifically called to inquire about a kind of strong wine. He felt that his status was a little low. No matter what, he still had to ask what he had to. Ivanov immediately laughed when he heard Tangjin asking him about the origin of the hard liquor in the basement. He mistakenly thought that Tangjin was also a person who liked liquor, so he bragged about his Ice Bear Alliance hard liquor and immediately said that he would give the rest of the hard liquor to Tangjin. Ivanov had good intentions, but it was a pity that half of the hard liquor in the basement had been taken away by Tangjin. The remaining amount was far from enough for Tangjin. Therefore, Tangjin refused Ivanov's gift and asked where he could sell this kind of hard liquor. In the end, Ivanov told Tangjin that this brand of spirits had stopped production. The wine in his house was the only stock left in the winery. However, he then told Tangjin the name of another spirit and said that the taste was almost the same. After hanging up the phone, Tangjin followed Ivanov's instructions and bought 1,000 bottles of hard liquor from the market before he was teleported back to the Luching world. After entering the room on the Cornerstone platform, Tangjin let out the strong wine and left a message to reply, "The wine is ready." He stared at the pile of hard liquor for a long time, but there was no sign of it disappearing. It seemed that the buyer named Hammer was not in front of the Cornerstone trading platform. When Tangjin saw that he couldn't see the process of the goods being transferred from the Cornerstone trading platform, he came out of his room in a somewhat disappointed manner and began to patrol the valley. Slowly walking to the compact and flat field in front of the building, Tangjin saw 2 soldiers fiddling with their walkie-talkies and chatting with others with a proud expression. Since the battle to defend the city, Tangjin distributed these walkie-talkies to the residents of Luching and equipped them with solar chargers. The residents were very curious about this tool that allowed long-distance communication, and anyone who was qualified to wear a walkie-talkie became the object of envy of the residents. Tangjin had seen it more than once. There were residents who were wearing walkie-talkies and placed them at the most conspicuous position in a high and mighty manner. From time to time, they would pretend to roar a few words and then wait for the envious eyes of others. When they saw Tangjin coming over, the 2 soldiers immediately put on a serious look and stood guard. They were afraid that Tangjin would blame them for fiddling with the walkie-talkie. However, the two of them had forgotten that the person on the other end of the walkie-talkie couldn't see their situation. "Hey, Bone Cat, why aren't you talking? Tell me about you sleeping with the lady boss at the Wanderer Market. I remember that the landlady's body could fit 3 of you. Did you stuff your head into her when you slept with her? Why aren't you replying? Did I guess correctly? Ha 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 ing luo." The words transmitted from the walkie-talkie were extremely vulgar, causing the face of the warrior called Bone Cat to turn red. He looked at the smiling Tangjin in front of him and laughed dryly. After which, he picked up the walkie-talkie and gritted his teeth as he growled, "Old Ninth Su, shut the F***ck up." The Bone Cat raised its head and looked at Jin Tang. Just as it was about to please Jin Tang, the rough voice from the walkie-talkie sounded again, "Bone Cat, I'll be honest with you. The lady boss once told me about you. She said that you saw her naked body and you were done with her before you even got into bed, hua hua." Ha 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 ha. A burst of unbridled laughter came from the walkie-talkie, but it was the laughter of a large group of people. The Bone Cat wished it could stick its hand into the walkie-talkie, strangle Su Laojiu, and find a hole to hide in. And NBSP, damn be asterisk starred, "Old Nine Su, you are too unreliable. Can't you tell that there is something wrong with my voice? This is in front of the city lord. You have completely embarrassed me." Tangjin laughed out loud when he saw the Bone Cat's miserable appearance. He gave the Bone Cat a perverted expression that any man could understand and left with his shoulders twitching. As soon as Jin Tang left, the Bone Cat picked up the walkie-talkie and shouted, "Old Ninth Su, you bastard. Just you wait. I'm not done with you today. Oh, come on. I'll wait for you when I'm completely naked. Don't let it end so quickly this time, ing luo ha 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 ha." The Bone Cat spat on the ground and secretly cursed in its heart. Although the city lord was magnanimous and didn't care about these trivial matters, it had lost all its face. Later on, it would definitely beat Su Laojiu up until he had panda eyes to vent the anger in its heart. Tangjin walked out from the training ground. What entered his eyes was a vast valley and a lively scene of labor. In the distance, Tyson was riding a 3-wheeled motorcycle with a few people in it. He was driving around in circles in the valley. These guys were shouting excitedly on the motorcycle, and from time to time, someone would stand up and shoot an arrow at the target in the distance. The dozens of straw dummy targets in the distance were already filled with sharp arrows. Your favorite ovals at n/vl/bin.com. Tangjin had brought 3 tricycles and even an agricultural tractor over. He had originally planned to use these things to transport supplies to the residents who were building in the valley. However, after Tyson learned how to operate them, he immediately asked for one, saying that it was for training his men. Upon seeing the scene in front of him, Tangjin finally understood that this was the training method. The tricycle that they had just obtained was very novel to Tyson and his soldiers. Naturally, they were having fun playing with it. Tangjin didn't blame them. After all, these things were for them to play with, so they had to get familiar with it. There was a large area near the valley that was filled with gravel plains. The ground was also very flat and very suitable for these vehicles to travel on. Jin Tang even planned to get a few more agricultural tractors to participate in the construction of the valley. Tangjin was only able to do this much. As for things like bulldozers and excavators, leaving aside whether his storage space could store them, just the maintenance and consumption of these machines, as well as their operation, would be enough to drive Tangjin crazy. Therefore, he was very wise to temporarily put them aside. And NBSP, Tyson pulled his men and ran 2 more laps before calling for them to start the 4-wheeled tractors, pulling up the cement pillars and iron wires, and running to the entrance of the valley to continue building the defense facilities. After the discussion of Tangjin and the others, the valley's entrance would be guarded by a combination of barbed wire and traps. At the same time, a two-story defensive tower would be built with stones and cement that could be seen everywhere. There would be people on duty at all times. At the same time as the defensive towers were being built, they were also preparing to build a cave sentry tower on the two cliffs at the entrance of the valley. This would increase the amount of work needed, and it would be enough for Tai Seng and the other residents to be busy for a while. After the sentry tower on the cliff was completed, Tangjin would equip the soldiers in charge of the guards with the Masanagan rifles, binoculars, and walkie-talkies that he had obtained from Ivanov. He would strive to discover the enemy's situation as soon as possible and report in time. Tangjin retracted his gaze from the entrance of the valley and looked at other places. On the other side of the valley, the 1,000 dragons were shouting loudly. The same group of residents were waving their sharp sickles, cutting down the weeds and then flattening the ground with shovels. After clearing out an area of 5 mu, they began to build a simple shed. The ruler of this shed was about tens of meters long. According to the plan, a total of 4 needed to be built side by side in 4 rows. The main body of the shed was the iron pipe brought by Tangjin and the stones in the valley. After the iron pipe was reinforced with right-angle buckles, the top of the shed would be covered with colored steel tiles, and the surrounding would be blocked by stones. This kind of shed could be used as a trading stall, and it could also provide a temporary place for the wanderers to shelter them from the sun and rain. It was also one of the means to attract homeless wanderers. Tangjin Chuan had the help of his storage space. Otherwise, it would have taken a long time to transport these construction materials. Now that the residents of the Holy Dragon City knew that the Lord City Master had magical abilities, Tangjin no longer avoided them. After seeing the Lord City Master release resources a few times, the residents of the Holy Dragon City were used to it. The lake in the valley could be seen further away. The rippling surface of the lake was very beautiful. The surface of the lake was vast, and the aquatic products were also very rich. Standing at a high place on a sunny day, you could see groups of fish swimming in the green lake. The whole picture was very beautiful. However, Tangjin was extremely clear that if he were to rashly enter the water to catch fish, he would definitely die a miserable death. In the luxuriant grass a few meters away from the shore, there was a type of worm that was like a thin rope. There were countless of them. What surprised Tangjin the most was that they were actually a type of miniature monster. The monster detectors showed that these monsters were not of a high level. They usually fed on seaweed, but when a creature entered the water and got close to the seaweed, they would bite and strangle it until the target collapsed in the water. At this time, the target of the attack would become a delicious meal to improve their diet. And these terrifying insects happened to be the food of another kind of strange fish in the lake, the black fish that swam in groups. Tai Seng had once told Tangjin that there should be something like a water monster living in the lake. He had personally seen a black shadow that was at least 7 to 8 meters long swimming across the lake. Even at night when the moon hung high in the sky, the roars of monsters could be heard from the lake. If Tangjin wanted to make use of this lake, he would have to get rid of all kinds of dangerous creatures in the lake. The first thing he had to get rid of was naturally the unknown water monster. If he allowed it to occupy the lake, it would be a big threat to the Holy Dragon City and the Wanderer Market that was being built in the valley. As for how to deal with this monster, Tangjin had already come up with a preliminary plan and would soon implement it. The lake was very fertile, and the land near the lake was the only land suitable for farming in the valley. After the reclamation of the residents, about 1 hectare of land had been cleared and several high-yield crops brought by Tangjin had been planted. The residents of the Holy Dragon City had never had any experience in farming land. Tangjin was the same. In order to learn how to farm, Tangjin searched for information and bought books. After a few days of hard work, he finally finished sowing the land. there were potatoes, sweet potatoes, and corn, and more than a dozen different types of crops. Whether these plants could grow smoothly would directly determine the Holy Dragon City's future food source. After all, it was not a long-term plan to rely on Tangjin to transport them. They needed a stable source of food. At the same time, it also cultivated a few kinds of wild plants unique to the world of Luqing, which were the main source of food for the wanderers in this world. For example, the astringent melon that grew underground and was the size of a basin, the bitter stem that had starch in its stem, and the sour bean that looked like a pea. Each one was more and more unpalatable. However, the wanderers in the world of Luqing had no choice. In order to fill their stomachs, they could only endure the strange taste and eat. It wasn't that Tangjin wanted to eat these crops. He only wanted to see if the yield would increase after applying the chemical fertilizer he had brought. If the results were ideal, it was completely possible to plant some of these crops. Compared to the crops on Earth, the life force of the plants in the Luqing world was too strong. Your favorite ovals at n/vl/bin.com. After walking around the cultivated land, Tangjin was pleasantly surprised to discover that the ground was already sparsely covered with tender shoots. They were the sweet potatoes, and other plants that he had brought from Earth. He quickly called over the residents who were in charge of farming the land and told them to take good care of the seedlings and to water and remove weeds in time. Tangjin's mood was extremely good when he saw these already sprouted crops. Each city tower would provide a limited amount of food exchange per month based on the number of residents. This was not a very important function, but it was indispensable. The food was not given for free, but needed to be exchanged with points. Unfortunately, the small amount of food exchanged could only ensure that the residents would not starve to death. It was absolutely impossible to fill their stomachs for every meal. However, in order to ensure the vitality of the city and let the residents work harder in the construction, the premise was to have a full stomach. Otherwise, how could the residents who were so hungry that they couldn't even walk properly work? It could be said that solving the problem of food sources was one of the important problems that Holy Dragon City was currently facing. If it could not be solved properly, it would be difficult for Holy Dragon City to develop too much in the future. If Tangjin could control the original world, then this problem would be easily solved. After transferring a large number of people, he would turn the original world into a global processing plant and a large granary. The dream was great, but it was still far away from being realized. So, from the current situation, if the residents of Holy Dragon City wanted to live a better life and have no worries about food and clothing, they had to work hard to earn money. Money? When Tangjin thought up to this point, he realized that he had work to do. He needed to prepare a currency to replace the brain pearl that could be used in the tower. When everything in Luqing was back on track, this currency could be used as a salary for the residents and also to exchange for the brain beads they had accumulated. Tangjin did not want to scheme against the pitiful brains in the pockets of the residents. Instead, he hoped that one day, all wanderers who came to the Holy Dragon City to trade would use the currency issued by the Holy Dragon City. Otherwise, they would not be able to buy and sell goods. If the wanderer teams wanted this currency, they would have to use the brain pearls to exchange for it. This way, a large number of brain pearls would enter Tangjin's pocket. City Lord, City Lord. Tangjin was pondering over a problem as he walked. Suddenly, a voice called out to him. He turned around and saw a soldier riding a tricycle that was driving unsteadily towards him. What's going on? Tangjin waited for the tricycle to stop before asking. Then, the soldier stopped the tricycle and panted heavily as he said to Tangjin, "We stopped a wanderer exploration team at the entrance of the valley. They asked to take refuge in the valley, saying that they wanted to avoid the pursuit of a group of kobolds." Leader Tai Seng and his brother stopped them, but Leader Thousand Dragons invited you over, saying that there's something on these people that you might be interested in. Tang Jin immediately turned around and jumped onto the tricycle when he heard this. He said to the soldier, "Step on the gas. We'll rush over immediately." "Yes, sir." The soldier replied and immediately pressed the pedal to the metal. He then ran toward the entrance of the valley. When he was about to reach the entrance of the valley, Tang Jin saw Tai Seng and Qianlong leading a group of fully armed warriors and surrounding them. There were also a dozen or so wanderers in tattered clothes squatting on the ground with dejected expressions. What made Tang Jin feel astonished was that when he was sizing up these wanderers, he noticed that golden light would occasionally flash on their bodies, making them appear extremely dazzling. Tang Jin was greatly surprised. After jumping down from the tricycle, he arrived in front of these wanderers in a few steps. "What's going on?" Tai Seng was asking a robust wanderer with a dark expression. From the guy's bruised face, it was likely that he had misbehaved earlier and was beaten up by Tai Seng. Qianlong walked to Tang Jin's side and pointed at the golden armor and hammer-shaped weapons on the wanderers' bodies. He remembered that Tang Jin liked to collect this kind of soft and heavy metal. Therefore, he immediately ordered his men to inform Tang Jin. Tang Jin's eyes were wide open as he looked at it. He picked up a wanderer's sledgehammer and took a closer look. He was certain that the sledgehammer was actually a whole piece of gold. He looked at the other wanderers, and they all had golden hammer-shaped weapons and armor made of flattened golden plates. A full set of gold equipment made Tang Jin sweat profusely. What a group of rich people! After weighing the weight of the golden hammer, Tang Jin could not help but ask, "I say, you guys are quite rich, to actually use this kind of weapon." When the brawny man who was beaten black and blue by Tyson heard this, he thought that Tang Jin was laughing at them. He straightened his neck and said, "You have money?" "Big brother, we really don't have any money. If we had money, we would use these broken weapons. They're heavy and soft, but we're so poor that we have no choice but to use these weapons." Tang Jin was speechless. A full set of genuine gold equipment and you're still crying poor? You guys are so poor that you only have money left, right? Of course, Tang Jin also knew that this burly man was speaking the truth. This was because in the world of Luqing, gold was truly worthless. Even a steel bar that could be made into a weapon was worth more than a large piece of gold. The only thing he was curious about was the golden hammer in his hand. It was obviously a component of some kind of artifact. Where did this group of wanderers get it from, and why were they in such a sorry state? After asking Tai Seng, Tang Jin finally understood the origin of these rich wanderers. All new Haptors NNV, Lbin.com. It turned out that these wanderers came from a tribe in the wilderness that made a living by nomadism. These nomad wanderers domesticated a few docile and controllable herbivore monsters that were rarely seen in the wilderness and wandered around all year round. The men were in charge of scouting, hunting, and guarding the tribe, while the women were in charge of gathering wild vegetables, fruits, grass seeds, and other food. Although they could not guarantee that they would be full, they were still better off than the homeless wanderers. When night fell, they would gather their tamed monsters and hide among them. They would rely on the aura of these tamed monsters to avoid the harassment of the wandering monsters at night. During the day, these monsters would ask wanderers to help clean up the parasites on their bodies and feed them a special pill that was made with a secret technique to help them relieve the pain of drug addiction. The nomadic wanderers used this kind of forbidden drug to control the monsters, and at night, they needed the monsters' protection, forming a state similar to symbiosis. However, their nomadic lives were destined to be more dangerous than those of the wanderers who defended an area for survival. This was because the herbivore monsters they raised would migrate and forage for food all year round. Therefore, the nomadic wanderers had to migrate with the monsters. The more places they traveled, the more monsters they encountered. This time, they encountered a group of kobolds nearby. After the battle, the entire tribe was destroyed. More than 100 kobolds were captured, and only a dozen of them escaped. After Tai Seng told him the information he had received, he quietly waited for Tang Jin's decision. Tang Jin was also considering whether he should rescue these wanderers. After all, there were more than 100 lives here. If he didn't rescue them, they might end up as the monster's food. If these wanderers joined the city, the population of the building would increase by a lot, and the construction in the valley would be much faster. However, according to the wanderers, the kobolds who attacked the tribe didn't seem like monsters, but a group of foreign races. Tang Jin's eyes narrowed when he heard this. If the kobolds in the vicinity were not monsters, but a foreign race, then they were destined to be the Holy Dragon City's enemies. Murong Xian had once said that there was an unspoken rule between the human race and the foreign races in the endless wilderness. That was, within a region, the human race and the foreign race must not coexist. One side must be completely destroyed. This rule had never changed for thousands of years. Since that was the case, he had to take the initiative to attack this time. After thinking up to this point, Tang Jin no longer hesitated and immediately issued an order. Tai Seng, immediately form a team, we'll go and rescue them. Hearing this, Tai Seng's eyes lit up and his face turned red with excitement as he roared, "Yes, sir." Eating well and wearing warm clothes every day, the bodies of Tai Seng and the others also gradually became stronger. Now that he had a high-quality weapon and Lu Qing to rely on, Tai Seng began to miss the days when he fought with monsters. He couldn't wait to appear in front of the Houndhead men and test out how sharp his weapon was. There were many warriors in the Holy Dragon City who had this thought, so after receiving the order, they began to rub their fists in excitement. Following Tang Jin's order, the entire city immediately began to move. The selected soldiers quickly began to assemble. According to the nomad from the nomad tribe, there were at least 200 dog-headed people. Hence, Lu Qing was prepared to send a 100-man team. With the advantage of their equipment, they would not be at a disadvantage in the battle. Tang Jin didn't want to send out so many people. With the weapons in his spatial storage, he was confident that he could slaughter all of these dog-headed people by himself. However, when he saw the excited expressions on the faces of Tai Seng and the others, he didn't say anything. The newly built Holy Dragon City needed a victory in battle, and these soldiers who had obtained excellent equipment also desired a victory in battle. Since that was the case, why should he stop them? If there was really a danger of casualties, it wouldn't be too late for him to save them. The dozen nomadic wanderers, who were dressed in gold equipment, did not have the air of a nouveau riche at all. Instead, they looked at the Holy Dragon City's warriors with envy, especially when they saw that all the warriors were wearing the same armor and holding sharp weapons. They were so envious that they even drooled. The organization that these warriors belonged to must be very powerful, and the leader of the organization must be a big tycoon. He actually gave everyone a set of armor and weapons. They still didn't know about the existence of the Holy Dragon City, because Tai Seng didn't even let them take half a step into the valley. They also didn't know that these soldiers were the residents of the Tower City that they were extremely envious of and saw as their ultimate goal. In order to speed up, Tai Seng even brought a tractor and a tricycle over. Everyone jumped on the vehicle, and the compartment was full. Even so, there were still some people who couldn't get on the tractor, and they ended up sitting on the front of the tractor. Tang Jin looked at the 4 cars that were packed with people. He suddenly felt as if he was looking at a Hindustani squeezing in a train in his original world. Seeing that the car couldn't fit so many people, Tai Seng started to roar and ordered the ones with the highest cultivation to get in the car as the vanguard, while the ones with the lowest cultivation could only run behind. After confirming that they did not miss anything, Tang Jin waved his hand and led the way with Tai Seng and a nomad. The rest of the people followed closely behind. The mighty group rumbled along the way as they quickly passed through the wilderness. Tang Jin welcomed the breeze in the wilderness and looked at the 100 Luqing soldiers who were armed to the teeth. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth as he secretly thought that his hard work was not in vain. This team finally had a form. Although the cultivation of the Holy Dragon City soldiers was uneven, and their overall strength was far inferior to the Black Rock City's army, with the equipment provided by Tang Jin, it was enough to protect themselves. The next thing he had to do was to lead them to clear the nearby wilderness, gather the scattered wanderers, and strengthen Holy Dragon City as much as possible to obtain a large number of brain beads. When they were strong enough, it would be the time for the Holy Dragon City to expand their territory. Tang Jin turned his head and glanced in the direction of Black Rock City. He muttered to himself in his heart. He hoped that those guys who were destined to be his enemies would give him a chance to grow and catch his breath. That way, he would also give them a decent ending ceremony. Once their actions endangered the Holy Dragon City, they could not blame him for using unscrupulous means. With a faster means of transportation, the long distance was no longer too far. After about an hour, Tyson sent a signal through the walkie-talkie that he had discovered the enemy. Upon seeing this, Tang Jin immediately took out his binoculars and looked in the direction that Tai Sing had indicated. In the wild grass that filled the sky, there were about 100 or so humans with barely any clothes tied up with ropes, hobbling forward with expressions of despair. There were more than 200 ferocious and ugly kobolds in the surroundings. They were holding weapons that looked like short spears, and stinky saliva was dripping from the corners of their mouths as they continuously whipped the staggering wanderers. From time to time, there would be people who couldn't move being whipped, and blood would immediately flow out of their naked bodies. The dog-headed man's wild barks and laughter could be heard from time to time. He seemed very proud. The rumbling of the convoy alerted the dog-headed people. They immediately looked in the direction of Tang Jin and the others and barked wildly at the same time. The human captives had also discovered Tang Jin's team. Some of them tried to shout for help, but they were knocked to the ground by the dog-headed people's spears. Their heads were covered in blood, and it was unknown whether they were alive or dead. The two sides faced off with a distance between them. After Tai Sing stood in the car and watched for a while, he turned his head to Tang Jin and said, "I've never seen these kobolds before. They have a certain level of discipline, and their weapons and equipment are also very uniform. According to my guess, they're probably a foreign tribe that has just moved here. They might even be building a city here." Tang Jin had also learned from Murongxian that these monster-like indigenous races all had their own unique social system. In the towers of these foreign races, there was also a city lord who ruled over a large number of foreign races. From time to time, these alien races would come out to search the wilderness and capture humans to enslave and keep in captivity, even to the extent of using them as food. Therefore, humans who fell into the hands of the alien races were almost better off dead. After these thoughts circulated in Tang Jin's mind, he expressionlessly observed for a while more before he asked Tai Sing, "I just want to ask, are you confident in annihilating all of them?" There was no hesitation in Tai Sing's answer as he nodded his head heavily, "Don't worry, no problem." "Since that's the case, Jinjin." Tang Jin waved the battle blade in his hand and took the lead to charge forward. "Then leave no one alive. Kill Baiyan." All the Holy Dragon City soldiers unsheathed their sharp blades and pounced on the kobolds with hatred on their faces. The battle was heated from the beginning, and blood and flesh splattered all over the gravel of the wilderness. Humans and these foreign races were natural enemies, and the best way to communicate with each other was through blades and blood. The dog-headed man opposite Tang Jin bared his yellow fangs and let out a low growl as he pounced at him. Compared to humans, the dog-headed man's running speed was a bit faster. In the blink of an eye, he had already pounced in front of Tang Jin. A short spear stabbed towards his chest. Tang Jin dodged to the side and immediately exerted force from his waist. A battle sword wrapped in an extremely strong force ruthlessly slashed at the dog-headed man's body. The dog-headed man let out a blood-curdling screech as his body convulsed violently. A terrifying wound appeared on his upper body, from his shoulder to his waist. The colorful objects fell to the ground with a crash. Avoiding the splattering blood, Tang Jin no longer paid attention to the dog-headed man who was definitely going to die. He raised his leg and kicked away a dog-headed man who was equipped to ambush a Holy Dragon City soldier. Hearing the crisp sound from its waist, it was likely that the dog-headed man's lumbar spine had already been shattered. From the corner of his eye, Tang Jin saw a dog-headed man thrusting his spear at him. He turned around fiercely and kicked a fist-sized stone from the ground at the same time, accurately smashing it into the dog-headed man's throat. The stone broke the dog-headed man's throat. It was in pain and was about to reach out to cover its neck, but Tang Jin's knife cut its head in half. Tang Jin attacked left and right within the dog-headed people. In an extremely short period of time, 6 dog-headed people were killed by him. The other parts of the battlefield were also locked in battle. A few crossbow arrows streaked across the air and pierced deeply into the kobold's forehead. The sharp arrowhead ground the kobold's brain into pieces. Jimmy, who was half kneeling on the ground, quickly put away the crossbow that he treasured. He didn't even look at the dog-headed man that he had shot in the throat. He unsheathed his sword and beheaded the dog-headed man that was pouncing at him. The ugly dog head flew into the sky and fell to the ground with blood splashing everywhere. "Kill!" Tyson roared as he swung a new long-hilted Emo sword, cutting all the kobolds in half. He had given his cold steel katana to Lisa, and this one was just right for him. Thousand Dragon brandished his 2 long and thin sabers, and he was as nimble as a butterfly. Every move he made was aimed at the kobold's vital points, and he was extremely agile. Most of the kobold's attacks were easily dodged by him. Old Mike was indeed an old fox, and his fighting style was also cunning and insidious. At this time, he had already killed 2 Houndhead men, and both of them had their balls kicked open by him during the battle. The Bone Cat's heart was filled with anger. He waved his sword madly and cut down a dog-headed man who had sneaked an attack on him. He would then curse, F***CKU, Old Ninth Su. Su Laojiu looked at the ferocious-looking Bone Cat and then glanced at the dog-headed man who had been chopped into pieces. His strong body shivered and he quickly stayed away from this guy, afraid that he would go crazy and cut people. All of the Holy Dragon City's soldiers were fighting bravely against the enemy. The defensive measures that Tang Jin had spent a lot of money to build for them had played their role. When they faced the kobold's superficial attacks, they returned the favor with a fatal blow. Tang Jin had experienced battle time and time again. He had actually developed a trace of infatuation for this kind of life and death battle. He wildly waved the weapon in his hand. Although his attacks were completely irregular and were completely random, the killing intent that burst forth from his body caused one to be terrified. He didn't need to consider any techniques when fighting the low-level kobolds with his level 3 strength. It was a head-on fight. With the heavy weapon and his abnormal strength, he had killed at least 20 kobolds in just a few minutes. Killing, screaming, blood splattering, and corpses strewn all over the field. The number of dog-headed people decreased as they were killed. In the end, a few warriors surrounded a dog-headed person and cut it into 8 pieces while it barked miserably. Tang Jin raised his blood-stained saber and swept it across the battlefield. However, he discovered that Qianlong was currently fighting with a kobold leader. From the looks of this kobold leader's cultivation, it was most likely around rank 2. No wonder Qianlong wasn't able to kill it so quickly. He took out his gun and fired a shot at the back of the kobold leader's waist. The kobold leader stumbled, and Qianlong took the opportunity to kick it to the ground. He then pulled out his military knife, intending to cut its throat. "Don't kill him yet. Keep him for interrogation." This guy is the leader of the Houndhead Men, so he should know a lot of things. Thousand Dragon nodded and quickly took out a rope made of monster tendons from his waist, tying the kobold leader up tightly. As Tai Sing laughed maniacally and swung his blade, beheading a dog-headed man, the battle had already come to an end. The ground was littered with the remains of the dog-headed men, and those who had not died were all covered in wounds and groaning non-stop while spitting out blood. Tang Jin glanced at Tyson, who gave him an understanding look and casually slashed at the neck of a dog-headed man with an abdomen injury. Jimmy and the other soldiers also raised their blood-dripping swords and slashed at the dog-headed men that were still alive. Tang Jin saw a dying dog-headed man struggling in pain. When it saw that he was staring at it, the dog-headed man immediately glared at Tang Jin with a fierce gaze. It revealed its canine teeth and squinted its eyes, looking very ferocious. Tang Jin sneered when he saw this. He pointed at the dog-headed man. The wanderer who was in charge of leading the way immediately rushed forward and used the golden hammer he had just picked up from the dog-headed man to finish him off. Above them came the unpleasant cries of a flock of carrion birds. They kept circling around. Wherever these birds appeared in groups in the wilderness, it meant that there were piles of corpses on the ground. He turned around and looked at the humans who were tied up by the kobolds. He realized that they didn't seem to be happy about being rescued. Instead, they looked worried. The monsters raised by the tribe had been killed by the Houndhead Men, and they had lost what they relied on to survive. Encountering such misfortune in the wilderness also meant that their path of survival had been cut off. What should they do from now on? All the rescued nomad tribesmen were at a loss. After seeing this scene, Tang Jin had a slight realization in his heart. They were worried about their future, right? The Holy Dragon City's warriors brandished their swords and gathered all the rescued nomad tribe wanderers together, surrounding them. Seeing the fully armed Holy Dragon City's warriors with expressionless faces, the nomad tribe wanderers felt extremely uneasy. Tang Jin's voice suddenly turned cold as his eyes swept across the tired and uneasy crowd. He spoke in a low voice that was not very loud but could be heard by everyone. I'll give you 2 choices. 1, I'll let you go, but I won't care about your life or death. I won't give you any protection. The second is that if you follow me, you won't have to worry about food and clothing. You'll be protected by powerful martial forces, and all you have to do is contribute your strength and work hard for the construction of the city. If you perform well, you may even get the status of a resident of Lu City. Tang Jin, who was standing on a high spot, extended his hand and pointed at everyone. His tone was incomparably resolute. Now, tell me your choice. The people who were originally at a loss were stunned. However, their eyes gradually lit up. Soon, someone shouted to follow Tang Jin. This shout was echoed by all the wanderers. In this world where human lives were as precious as grass, it was God's blessing to have such a chance to make a choice. People would instinctively choose the side that was beneficial to them, and there was no need for them to worry about making this choice. Tang Jin was secretly happy in his heart. There were nearly 200 young and strong men and women who had become his subordinates. This meant that the Holy Dragon City was not far from becoming powerful. Old Mike commanded the soldiers to clean up the battlefield, while the injured rested and treated their wounds. It was already a great victory for them to not lose a single soldier in this battle. The morale of the victorious soldiers was high, and even the injured ones were full of smiles. They joked and laughed at each other. Tang Jin, accompanied by Qianlong and Tai Sing, walked to the front of the tied-up dog-headed man and sized him up with a cold gaze. Due to being shot by Jin Tang, the kobold leader had lost quite a bit of blood. However, this fellow's vitality was very tenacious. Even at this moment, it was still constantly twisting its body, as if it was planning to escape. 1. Qianlong gave the dog-headed man a vicious kick, but his leg was almost bitten by the dog-headed man. The dog-headed man's ferocity was evident. Tangjin naturally did not show any mercy when he saw that the dog-headed man was still not being obedient even at this moment. After Qianlong ruthlessly kicked him a few times, this fellow finally became obedient. However, his eyes were still filled with ferocity. At the same time, he used a strange tone to mutter a few words. Qianlong and Taising were completely confused and couldn't understand what the dog-headed man was saying. However, Tangjin, who had activated the Universal Language Translator, understood what the dog-headed man was saying. Tangjin explained as he looked at the two people who had blank expressions, "It's scolding us, saying that we'll be killed by their chief sooner or later, and then hung up to be dried meat." Qianlong was enraged upon hearing this, and he kicked the dog-headed man again. However, the dog-headed man only laughed in disdain, as if he was mocking an animal. Tangjin looked at the ferocious-looking dog-headed man and sneered in disdain. Then, under the astonished gazes of Taiseng and his partner, he used the same language as the dog-headed man leader and said, "You're still so stubborn even when you're about to die. Do you believe that I'll ask someone to tie you up and let you watch your own flesh being cut into thin skin by a small knife?" The dog-headed man leader, who originally had a ferocious expression, was immediately stunned when he heard this. He stared at Tangjin and was silent for a while before he asked, "Human, you can actually speak our language?" "It's just some simple groans and barks, what's so hard about it? Tell me about your tribe's situation, or I'll really cut you into 1,000 pieces." "Believe me, that feeling won't be good," Tangjin sarcastically replied when he heard this. He revealed a disdainful expression towards the foreign race's simple and poor vocabulary. The dog-headed man slightly narrowed his eyes when he heard this. He did not say anything. He only stubbornly straightened his body and looked at Tangjin without shifting his eyes. "Are you going to tell me or not? If you don't tell me, I'm really going to make a move?" Tangjin asked. Killing intent was revealed in his eyes. "Human, don't even think about it. Even if you kill me, I won't reveal any information about our tribe. Just give up." The kobold leader looked at Tangjin and sneered. There was a trace of contempt in his eyes. Could it be that this human who knew the kobold language didn't know that the kobolds would rather die than betray their master? All test NOVL on novelben/.cm. Tangjin looked at the kobold leader's eyes and seemed to have understood something. He helplessly said to Tyson, "Let's kill it, but don't let it die too easily. Then we'll return to the valley." After Tangjin finished speaking, he no longer looked at the kobold leader. Instead, he looked at the distant sky in a daze. A writhing sound came from behind him, followed by a painful groan. Qianlong walked over from the back. He wiped his blood-stained military knife and asked Tangjin, "City Lord, the kobold tribe should be nearby. Do you want me to go and investigate? I'll handle this matter myself. You and Taising have more important things to do." Tangjin thought for a while and said, Now that the undead race was wreaking havoc in this area, Holy Dragon City was able to get a temporary respite because of its hidden location and the gravel wasteland as a barrier. However, this situation can't last long. I estimate that very soon, there will be scattered undead. Holy Dragon City will definitely enter the undead sites. According to their style of destroying all living things, they will definitely not let Holy Dragon City go. Thus, a great battle is inevitable. Other than the corpse race, Black Rock City will also be our future enemy. If there's a chance, I will destroy that place without hesitation, even if it means sacrificing the innocent citizens of Black Rock City. Otherwise, once Black Rock City has escaped from the corpse race's crisis, they will definitely use all their strength to destroy Holy Dragon City, because they will not allow any other city to exist on this land. It will make them unable to sleep and eat in peace. I've been trying my best to avoid killing the human race because compared to the powerful foreign tribes, the human race is too miserable and pitiful. You can think that I'm too merciful, but in fact, I also think that I'm a soft-hearted person, especially when it comes to dealing with the human race. But now, as the city lord of Holy Dragon City, I shoulder the lives of the city's residents and their hopes for the future. So, I must be ruthless and unscrupulous in dealing with my enemies. Only in this way can Holy Dragon City stand tall. After Tang Jin finished speaking, he turned to look at Qianlong and then at Tai Seng, who had just walked over, and said in a low voice, "It's time to use the firearms that I brought last time for training. With these weapons, I believe that Black Rock City will no longer have the power to fight us. We can even destroy it at any time. However, the main enemies in front of us are the undead race and the Houndhead men. I have a premonition that although these firearms can make us invincible in this area, this world is too vast, and powerful opponents are everywhere. It's very likely that at some point, these firearms won't be able to harm the enemy, and the powerful cultivator battle teams will be the masters of the battlefield. So, I want you to work hard to lead the qualified residents to cultivate. As for the cultivation resources, we can buy, rob, or even steal them." Tang Jin sighed when he said this. He looked in the direction of Black Rock City and slowly said, "In this aspect, the Black Rock City, an old city with thousands of years of history, has done a very good job. They do their best to cultivate talented children, allowing them to start cultivating from a young age, and also giving them generous rewards. We only saw how powerful the cultivators of Black Rock City were, but we did not see the price that Black Rock City had to pay." Tang Jin's words made Qianlong and Tai Seng speechless. They could feel the existence of danger from Tang Jin's words. As a part of the Holy Dragon City, they were also secretly worried. So, if we want to protect and strengthen Holy Dragon City, we need all of our hard work. Can I rely on you? Tang Jin looked at his two capable subordinates and asked in a very solemn tone. Qianlong and Tai Seng exchanged a look and said in unison, "I won't let down the city lord." Tang Jin looked at the two of them and smiled. After which, he did not say anything else. Instead, he continued to stare at the sky in a daze. This was the first time he had carefully observed the sky of the Tower World. He discovered that it was extremely high and extremely far away. Thanks to the barren gravel plains protection, there were very few monsters in the nearby area, so the team returned safely. As the Holy Dragon City was a level 1 city, the number of residents was limited to 500. These 200 wanderers who had just entered the valley could not enjoy the benefits of being a resident yet. Only by performing well would they be given the status of a resident when the city was upgraded to level 2. They temporarily settled the wanderers in the market that was being built in the valley and arranged for people to deliver food and water to them. They would rest there at night because there were no monsters in the valley except for the lake, so it was not dangerous to spend the night there. By the next morning, they would join the team building the valley and contribute to the Holy Dragon City. After Tang Jin returned to Lucheng, he went with Qianlong and Tai Seng to the place where the military fire was stored. He then picked out the different types of weapons and taught the two how to use them. Lucheng would pick out residents who had no talent for cultivation and train them on how to use these weapons. He would also form a team with guns as the main combat weapon and cold weapons as the auxiliary. As for the residents who were talented in cultivation, in addition to mastering the use of firearms and weapons, most of their energy was still focused on cultivation and improving their strength. Their main weapons were still swords, and firearms were only auxiliary. After the residents in charge of the combat guards had mastered the simple operation of firearms and Tang Jin had explored the location of the Kobold tribe, the Holy Dragon City would carry out an extermination operation on the Kobold tribe and completely wipe them out from this area. After Tang Jin handed over the Holy Dragon City's matters to everyone, he made some preparations and left the tower alone, heading to the place where he had killed the dog-headed man. Although he could roughly confirm that the dog-headed people were nearby, the endless wilderness was simply too vast. There were countless strange and hidden places. It was not an easy task to find the dog-headed people's camp. Tang Jin had a mysterious ability. Even if he encountered danger, he could easily escape. Therefore, he was the best person to scout out the enemy's situation. Moreover, ever since he came to the Tower World, Tang Jin's range of activity was limited to the vicinity of Black Rock City. This time, he was also taking the opportunity to go out and take a look. The greatest characteristic of the wilderness was its desolation. There was only one person walking alone in this vast world. This kind of lonely feeling almost caused one to collapse. Fortunately, there were many things in the wilderness that were extremely novel to Tang Jin. It was able to offset the depression in his heart. Due to him being alone, Tang Jin's speed was extremely fast. It did not take long for him to arrive at the location of the previous battle. The blood that splattered on the gravel had long dried up, and the kobolds' corpses had turned into piles of white bones, scattered everywhere. This was the credit of some scavenger monsters in the wilderness. They would not let go of anything on the corpses except for the white bones. Tang Jin stepped on the dog-headed man's bone. After a crisp crack sound, it broke into two. Tang Jin picked up the broken bone and took a look before casually throwing it to the side. Tang Jin pondered for a moment after sweeping his gaze around the surroundings. Then, he headed toward a hilly area in the distance. The dog-headed people liked to live in caves. Most of their residences were located on slightly higher ground. They would then dig a cave and live in it. According to the wanderers of the nomadic tribes, these dog-headed people were particularly fertile and had a particularly tenacious vitality. Often, it only took a few years for a small dog-headed tribe to rapidly expand into a large tribe. It was for this reason that the descendants of the dog-headed people would leave the tribe after they grew up. They would take the resources given by the family and then find a suitable land in the wilderness to live and reproduce. Tang Jin suddenly thought of the founder of Black Rock City. After he became an adult, he led his subordinates to explore the wilderness before establishing Black Rock City. However, the difference between the two was that the founder of Black Rock City came out voluntarily to explore, while the descendants of the dog-headed people who were influential and powerful had to go out to explore. It was precisely because of this habit that led to a large number of kobolds in the wilderness. Even though they had encountered countless crises of extinction, they could still rise again in a very short time. Although they were not the most powerful alien race in the world of Luqing, they were one of the most tenacious alien races. Tang Jin was thinking about something as he walked. He was getting closer and closer to the hilly area. Whoosh! A gust of wind blew over. Tang Jin, who was thinking about something, suddenly recovered his senses and easily avoided the short spear that was attacking him. A dog-like barking sound was emitted from a cluster of wild grass. Immediately after, two dog-headed people scuttled out from within. They bared their teeth and pounced towards Tang Jin. Their eyes were as if they had seen a pile of delicious meat. Tang Jin coldly snorted. He closed the distance between him and the dog-headed people in a few steps. At the same time, he sent a flying kick, sweeping a dog-headed person 4 to 5 meters away. This kick landed on the dog-headed person's waist, directly breaking its lumbar spine. The dog-headed man that had landed on the ground was half paralyzed. It scratched around with its hands and screamed in pain. Its voice was sharp and piercing. The other dog-headed man did not care about his injured companion. Instead, he raised his short spear and stabbed towards Tang Jin's lower abdomen. The sharp tip of the spear was only a few centimeters away from his body. At the same time, the dog-headed man's ugly face revealed a sinister smile. However, the expected scene of the short spear piercing into the human body did not happen. The black cloak actually blocked the short spear that had pierced through countless human bodies, and it could not move an inch. The dog-headed man was stunned for a moment. Then, he picked up the short spear and stabbed it straight at Tang Jin's lower jaw. Tangjin extended his hand and gently blocked the short spear that was coming at him. At the same time, he broke it into 2 pieces and ruthlessly inserted it into the dog-headed man's head from top to bottom under the dog-headed man's frightened eyes. Tangjin's gaze shifted to the hilly area as he watched the kobold softly fall. The kobold tribe should be nearby since there were sentinels lying in ambush here. Tangjin slowly walked to the front of the dog-headed man whose lumbar spine had been broken. He used an ice-cold gaze to look at it as he listened to the filthy words that were continuously spewing out of its mouth. "You damned human, I'm going to dig your heart out and eat it with the bitter grass powder. Then I'll make your meat into jerky." Tangjin's brows slightly furrowed when he heard the dog-headed man's vicious curse. "Have you eaten a lot of people?" The kobold language that suddenly came out of Tangjin's mouth stunned the kobold for a moment. Then, it lay on the ground and laughed wildly. It laughed very happily. "Of course, I've eaten a lot of human beings. Many times, we have to rely on human beings to survive the famine. You don't know that I can eat in many ways, especially human cultivators like you. No matter if it's bones or meat, they are all very chewy." Tangjin silently listened to the dog-headed man's bragging. After a while, he stood up and turned around to kick the dog-headed man's corpse that he had stabbed to death with his short spear. Tangjin squatted down and looked at the dog-headed man who was still talking nonsense. He took out his purple lightning short sword and cut off a piece of meat from the dog-headed man's corpse. He picked it up from the purple lightning short sword and placed it in front of the dog-headed man. "You've eaten so many humans. Do you want to taste your own kind?" The crazy-looking kobold sentry was stunned when he heard this. Immediately after, a hint of madness flashed in his eyes. He desperately stretched his head forward and tried to bite Tangjin's calf. Tangjin took a small step back to avoid the dog-headed man's stinky mouth. After which, he chuckled as he grabbed the dog-headed man's head and forcefully stuffed the piece of meat into his mouth. The dog-headed man struggled with all his might and emitted a woo-woo sound. He refused to open his mouth no matter what. "You were so happy just now, but when it was your turn to eat your companion, you refused. Unfortunately, it's not your turn to make the decision now, you have to eat even if you don't want to." Tangjin coldly snorted. He used his sword to cut open the dog-headed man's cheeks before stuffing an entire piece of meat inside. The piece of meat was about the size of 2.5 fists. The dog-headed man did not want to eat it, but he could not spit it out. It was very uncomfortable to choke on it. He shook his head with blood in his mouth, and his eyes turned from madness to fear. "Eat, why aren't you eating? Why don't you king eat?" Tangjin growled and cut another 2 pieces and stuffed them into the dog's mouth. He watched as the dog's eyes rolled back and it was about to suffocate. Only then did he slowly calm the anger in his heart and took a small skull from the dog-headed man's waist. Tangjin was certain that this was a child's skull. Now, it was hung on the dog-headed man's waist as an ornament. The fate of that child could be imagined. Follow US stories at nvl/by/n.com. Tangjin stared at the skull's black eye sockets for a few times before he squatted down and buried it deep into the ground. After Tangjin got up, he no longer paid attention to the dying dog-headed man and activated the quantum stealth light curtain to continue moving forward. When he passed by the grass where the 2 dog-headed sentinels were hiding, Tangjin saw a slanted cave on the ground. It must be the resting place of the dog-headed sentinels. However, the scattered skulls around the cave made Tangjin feel that it was rather glaring. The weeds in the hilly area were slightly denser, but that was only relative to the gravel plain. As he got closer to the hills, there were more and more traces of dog-head man activity, but more of them were scattered bones. Tangjin's eyes were filled with fury when he saw the scene. However, as he gradually entered deeper into the hilly area, the fury in his eyes gradually dissipated. Replacing it was an irrefutable killing intent. Tang Jin was currently standing on a high ground. The view here was very good. He was able to easily see the surrounding scenery from a high ground. Hundreds of kobolds were busy on a piece of flat land not far away. They seemed to be preparing for something. From time to time, the leader of the kobolds would bark and shout, making it very lively. Not far away, there was a huge pot with food being cooked inside. A human was stripped naked and lying on the ground. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Tang Jin looked at the scattered bones around him and the oil that was constantly churning in the pot. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Tang Jin slowly scanned the entire place. He discovered that there were many adjacent caves on the mound not far away. From time to time, there would be dog-headed people entering and exiting from them, carrying something. One of the caves was guarded by two particularly strong hound-head men with machetes on their waists and short spears in their hands. They did not allow any hound-head men to approach, or they would punch and kick. Tang Jin stared at the entrance of the cave for a while and determined that this was the treasure room of the dog-headed people. There were definitely precious resources brought by this tribe inside, and they could even be the building foundation and brain. The foundation that the kobolds used to build their city was different from that of humans. They did not come from the wild buildings, but were split from the foundation of the kobold main city, which was called the Sacred City. After these split foundations were upgraded through continuous sacrifices, they would split again and give them to the descendants of the kobold nobles who had left the clan. The reason why the dog-headed people did this was that only this kind of building cornerstone that was split from the holy city's cornerstone had the most suitable attribute for the dog-headed people, which was the enhancement of their reproductive ability. Only by giving birth and raising more would they be able to ensure that the dog-headed people would not be destroyed. Tang Jin wasn't interested in this kind of damnable foundation stone attribute. What he cared about was the brain pearls that were used as a sacrifice during the construction of the tower. This was because once the tower was built, the first sacrifice would require 10,000 brain pearls. Since he had encountered it, there was no reason for him not to take it. Moreover, Tang Jin could also see that these dog-headed people were preparing for the construction of the tower. Looking at the progress, it was likely that they would be able to perform the sacrificial ceremony today. Tang Jin secretly thought that it was such a coincidence. If these dog-headed people had successfully built their towers and the dog-headed people were to defend the city, the difficulty of the attack would increase greatly. It might even increase unnecessary casualties. This was definitely not a scene that Tang Jin wanted to see. Right now, what he had to do was to wait and see. He would wait until the most critical moment to make a move. Thinking of this, Tang Jin sat down on the ground and watched the group of dog-headed people busy with their work without saying a word. He sat there for several hours. When Tang Jin saw a group of dog-headed people carrying a black stone platform and placing it in front of the hill while shouting, he knew that the time he had been waiting for had arrived. He hurriedly stood up and began to move his somewhat numb limbs. After taking out the purple lightning short sword, Tang Jin began to slowly move downward. When he had reached the area that the map could cover, he stopped. He didn't dare to get too close, because the quantum stealth light curtain couldn't block sound and smell. If he got too close, he might be detected by these sensitive dog-headed people and discover his existence. At this moment, the dog-headed people began to gather together. There were at least 1,000 of them, and more than half of them were short spear-wielding dog-headed warriors. It didn't take long for a tall kobold, who was dressed much more exquisitely than the other kobolds, to slowly walk out of the cave. He came to the black stone platform under the worship of many kobolds. Looking at the dog-headed man's appearance, he should be the clan leader of this group of dog-headed people. At this moment, the kobold chieftain, who was standing in front of the stone platform, had a smug expression on his face. He was raising his hands up high and mumbling something. Tangjin could clearly hear through the translator that the prayer ceremony needed to be carried out before the construction of the tower was completed. Next, he would have to sacrifice his brain. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the Kobold chieftain to take out a foundation stone from his bosom and place it on the stone platform. He used a sharp knife to cut his finger and dripped his blood on it. At the same time, 10 dog-headed people walked out of the heavily guarded cave. Each of them carried a heavy leather bag and walked towards the black stone platform. Now, move! Tangjin immediately approached the kobolds. When he was only a dozen meters away from them, Tangjin took out 2 grenades from his storage space. He aimed one at the Kobold Patriarch and the other at the kneeling kobold. He threw them at the same time. The grenade that appeared out of thin air smashed onto the ground, causing the kobolds to panic. The many guards around the Kobold Patriarch reacted extremely quickly and immediately protected the Patriarch. At the same time, they twitched their noses desperately and locked onto Tangjin's position in an instant. However, before they could do anything, the 2 grenades immediately exploded. The deafening sound was deafening, and the gathered kobolds let out miserable howls one after another. The 2 grenades thrown by Tangjin had killed at least a dozen kobolds. Even one of the Kobold Patriarch's guards had been killed, and countless kobolds had been injured. Seeing that the dog-headed people were in chaos, Tangjin did not hesitate at all. Like a gust of wind, he rushed in front of the 10 dog-headed people who were carrying the leather bags and slashed his sword at the 2 arms of one of the dog-headed people who were tightly holding onto the leather bag. The purple lightning short sword was too sharp. Even after Tangjin had cut off its arms, the dog-headed man still did not feel any pain. It only let out a painful howl when it saw that both its arms had been cut off. Tangjin waved his hand and the leather bag, which was still tightly held by his 2 broken arms, was placed into his storage space. When the other dog-headed people with leather bags saw this, they immediately turned around and ran into the cave with the leather bags on their backs. The rest of the dog-headed people also recovered from the chaos. They relied on their keen sense of smell and had already faintly locked onto Tangjin. One after another, they stood behind the dog-headed people with leather bags and tried to stop Tangjin from snatching. At this moment, the Kobold Patriarch was also covering one of his bleeding eyes with his hand and roaring madly at his clansmen. Tangjin could clearly hear what he meant. He wanted to capture Tangjin at all costs. The kobold guards beside the Kobold Patriarch threw short spears at Tangjin's back. Tangjin, who saw this scene through the map, immediately dodged. As a result, after the short spears passed Tangjin, they directly nailed several kobolds to the ground. The level of these dog-headed guards was around level 2. The short spears they threw were extremely lethal. Even though Tangjin had a black cloak to protect him, he still did not dare to be careless. Tangjin couldn't help but become anxious when he saw the dog-headed people with leather bags walking further and further away. He immediately took out his automatic rifle and fired wildly in front of him. The dense bullets caused the dog-headed people to fall in droves. However, following the dog-headed people's leader's roar, even more fearless dog-headed people immediately filled the path cleared by the bullets. They then fearlessly pounced toward Tangjin. Many ants could bite an elephant to death, not to mention that he was facing a group of extremely loyal, fierce, and crazy dog-headed people. When Tangjin saw that the situation was not good, he immediately activated his teleportation ability and escaped from the encirclement of the dog-headed people. He directly appeared in front of the dog-headed people who were carrying leather bags. Shwa shwa shwa! Tangjin swung his sword 3 times in a row, killing all the kobolds near him. At the same time, he kept the brains into his storage space. Now, Tangjin had already snatched 4 bags of brains, while the remaining 6 bags were carried by the 6 kobolds, each running in different directions. Tangjin cursed in his heart. These dog-headed people were actually so cunning. They even knew how to split up and escape. In this way, he could only chase after one of the dog-headed people while the other 5 would take the opportunity to escape. Although Tangjin was furious, he had no choice. He could only lock onto a dog-headed man and quickly chase after it. The process of the pursuit was not smooth sailing. Under the command of a few kobolds with an unusually sensitive sense of smell, short spears were constantly shot at him. There were a few times when they almost pierced Tangjin's face. It scared him so much that he doubled his speed before he could avoid those short spears. However, this extreme speed consumed a lot of physical strength. When Tangjin took a great risk to kill the dog-headed man that he had locked onto, his physical strength was almost exhausted. It would definitely be extremely dangerous if they continued to stay in this situation. Tangjin was a little reluctant as he glanced at the dog-headed people who were carrying leather bags on their backs. He then quickly retreated into the distance. Tangjin ran with great difficulty. He was out of breath, as if he was about to die. He remembered that the last time he ran in such a sorry state, it was because there were 3 corpse monster centurions chasing behind him. They were all level 4 monsters. This time, the pursuers were the foreign kobolds. The highest level was only level 2, but there were 400 to 500 of them. Discover EU chapters at novelby.co. These dog-headed people's eyes were all red, revealing an appearance that they wanted to bite Tangjin to death. They howled as they ran, and at the same time, they desperately threw the short spears in their hands. They did have a reason to hate Tangjin. After all, he had destroyed the extremely sacred sacrificial ceremony for the construction of the city, snatched the brains that were sacrificed during the construction of the city, and even killed many of their fellow dog-headed people. No matter which point it was enough for the vengeful dog-headed people to chase him to death. The dog-headed people in the wilderness were very good at running. Many of the targets that they had locked onto were only captured and killed by the dog-headed people when they were exhausted from running. Now, they were using the same trick again, trying to run to Tangjin's death. Shinkoong Tang had the cultivation of a 3rd level, but he was powerless in the face of hundreds of angry dog-headed people. After all, the so-called suppression of cultivation base was reflected in one-on-one combat. He could easily kill a level 2 doghead man, but when faced with a group of level 2 doghead men, he could only run away. Simply escaping wasn't Tangjin's style. During this period of time, he used grenades and rifles to distract the enemy. He even used the black technology of the infrasonic application in his mobile phone. However, he was still unable to stop this group of dog-headed people who seemed to have contracted rabies and were willing to risk their lives. And every time he turned around to attack, he would be hit by the short spears. If he was just a little slower, he would be hit by the short spears. Although the black cloak could block the penetration of the short spears, it still hurt him. During this period, several short spears headed straight for Tangjin's face. Tangjin was so frightened that he hurriedly dodged to avoid being disfigured. The dog-headed man also gradually discovered that the short spears were unable to pierce through the black cloak. The next time they attacked, they coincidentally targeted his head at the same time. This made Tangjin not dare to stop and attack easily. He had thought of activating the teleportation to leave, but he seriously suspected that these lunatics would stay where they were until he appeared again. After all, he had encountered the same situation in the wild building of the undead race. That would be too passive. Tangjin did not wish to start chasing and fleeing again after he was teleported back. Therefore, he must think of a method. When he ran out of the dog-headed people's lair, Tangjin did not observe the direction. Now, looking at the surrounding scenery, it seemed that he was getting further and further away from the Holy Dragon City. It was different from the gravel plain near the Holy Dragon City. This land seemed very fertile, but strangely, not a single blade of grass grew on it. Instead, it was full of all kinds of strange mushrooms. The tallest one among these mushrooms was actually more than 10 meters tall, and its cap was as large as a roof. While Tang Jin was running, he unintentionally kicked away a few large mushrooms that looked like vegetable buns. However, he choked on the yellow powder that had spattered out, causing him to cough continuously. His throat also felt an uncomfortable burning sensation. Tang Jin, who had suffered a small loss, no longer dared to touch these mushrooms. Instead, he quickly took out a towel to cover his mouth and nose as he ran, trying his best to avoid these terrifying large mushrooms. The Houndhead men at the back suffered a great loss. There were many of them, and from time to time, the Houndhead men would kick the mushrooms that were filled with powder, causing them to burst into a series of coughs. When the coughs reached the sky above the Houndhead men who were chasing after them, it was as if they had lit up a beacon. The colorful mushroom powder that rose up was like billowing smoke. Many of the dog-headed people who had the idea of tearing Tang Jin apart alive finally began to fall behind one after another under the harassment of the mushroom powder. They squatted on the ground and coughed non-stop, as if they were about to cough out their lungs. The kobolds who coughed particularly violently even started to cough out blood foam. The powder landed on the sweaty Houndhead men, immediately revealing its strange toxicity. Some of the Houndhead men began to break out in red rashes, and the pain and itchiness were unbearable. The Houndhead men scratched with their sharp claws until their skin and flesh were rolled up and they were drenched in blood. Only then did they feel better. The small mushroom directly reduced the number of dog-headed people chasing after Tang Jin by a third. The effect was much stronger than the threat of death. After Tang Jin inadvertently saw the scene, he immediately rejoiced in his heart. He took out a grenade from his storage space and did not need to stop and turn around to throw it. He only needed to casually throw it behind him. After which, the shockwave from the explosion would blow up a large pile of mushrooms. After which, a 5-colored powder would scatter all over the sky. When the dog-headed people that were chasing after him saw this, they immediately used the most vicious words to continuously curse Tang Jin. However, they had no choice but to stop in their tracks and think of a way to avoid this annoying mushroom powder. Tang Jin saw that the effect of doing this was not bad, so he slightly slowed down. After catching his breath, he threw out a few more grenades in succession, exploding into a cloud of mushroom smoke. The dog-headed people were in a mess, and the scene was very chaotic. "Take off your clothes and give them to us. Then, you can go back." Tang Jin quickly took a sip of water. He was rejoicing in his heart that he had finally found a way to get rid of this group of dog-headed people. However, he did not expect that a hoarse roar of a dog-headed person would suddenly come from the smoke. Not long after, nearly 100 dog-headed people, who were wrapped up like mummies and only revealed a pair of blood-red eyes, rushed out and fiercely pounced towards Tang Jin. This kind of powder was similarly stimulating to the eyes, causing the dog-headed people's eyes to swell up. It was so painful that they wished they could gouge out their eyes. However, in order to make it easier to see Tang Jin clearly, they still revealed their eyes and tried their best to widen them. The hatred that was revealed in his eyes was practically tangible. This was because Tang Jin was the first human that caused them to suffer such losses and turn into such a miserable state. A human who was only fit to be food had actually made them so miserable. Naturally, their killing intent was soaring. What Tang Jin didn't know was that the mushroom powder had severely reduced the dog-headed people's sense of smell. They could only vaguely determine Tang Jin's location. If Tang Jin ran a little further and hid, he could rely on the effect of the quantum invisibility light curtain to escape the pursuit of this group of dog-headed people. However, he had been chased by the dog-headed people all the way by their sense of smell. Even if he activated the quantum stealth light curtain, it was useless. Therefore, at this moment, when Tang Jin saw the group of dog-headed people rushing out with red and swollen eyes, he was like a bird that was startled by the mere twang of a bough. He immediately ran away. The sound of running caused the group of dog-headed people, whose hearing was not affected, to immediately lock onto Tangjin's position. All of them mustered all their strength to chase after him. At the same time, they wanted to habitually let out a roar. However, they sadly discovered that because of the poison of the mushroom powder, they were simply unable to let out a loud and clear howl. Tangjin, who had just managed to catch his breath, ran for a full half an hour before he once again felt the fatigue. He truly did not wish to continue running like this. He might as well teleport back to his original world. At the very most, he would just wait for his rest before running again. This thought flashed in Tangjin's heart. He was just about to activate the teleportation when he suddenly discovered that there seemed to be a lonely mountain peak standing not far in front of him. When he took a closer look, Tangjin was shocked to discover that this was not a mountain peak at all. Instead, it was an incomparably huge rotten tree stump. This tree stump was at least several thousand meters tall, and this was the height after it was broken. Before it was broken, it was probably tall enough to reach the sky. Ever since Tangjin came to the world of Luqing, he had never seen a tree, which made him think that there were no trees in this world. Now that he finally saw a tree, he did not expect it to be so huge and only a stump was left. At the same time, Tangjin also faintly discovered that there seemed to be a huge tree hole under the tree stump. Tangjin immediately dispelled the thought of teleporting. He took a deep breath and began to wildly run toward the huge tree stump that was like a mountain. The dog-headed people chasing behind him didn't care where Tangjin was going. They only had one goal, and that was to capture Tangjin, peel his skin, and pull out his tendons. Then, they would make him into a pot of delicious human meat soup and drink it. Perhaps this was the only way to vent their anger and their clan leader. As they continued to run and chase, Tangjin and the dog-headed man pursuers finally arrived at the tree hole under the huge stump. Tangjin came to the stump of the mountain and looked up. This mountain-like stump had an extremely ancient aura. The trunk was as hard as a rock, and the peeled bark revealed mottled colors. The rest of the tree was covered in moss. Tangjin lowered his head and looked at the huge tree hole in front of him that was over 10 meters tall. It seemed to be extremely dark inside. He did not know what unknown danger was hidden inside. He turned his head and looked at the dog-headed people that were only a few dozen meters away from him. Tangjin no longer hesitated. He turned his head and directly entered the tree hole. When the dog-headed people chasing behind saw Tangjin enter the tree hole, they immediately left 10 dog-headed people to guard the entrance. The rest of the dog-headed people also rushed into the tree hole like a swarm of bees. The space inside the tree hole was extremely large. It was so large that it was inconceivable. It was different from the pitch-black darkness that Tangjin had imagined. The interior of the tree hole was filled with beautiful fluorescent things. It was unclear whether they were plants or animals. They slightly swayed their tentacle-like limbs and constantly scattered fluorescent dust into the dark tree hole. Being in such a cave was like being in a fairy tale world. Tangjin was not bewitched by this beautiful scene. Only the heavens knew if this powder was poisonous. It was better to be careful. He tied the towel tightly to his face and looked around. He found that there were countless tunnels inside the tree hole, as if they were gnawed out by giant worms. They were winding and led to unknown places. The dog-headed people behind him had already rushed in. Tangjin no longer hesitated. He randomly picked a hole and quickly entered it. The dog-headed people who were following closely behind did not see which passage Tangjin had entered. In addition, their sense of smell had lost its effect, and a strange smell filled the tree hole. The dog-headed people were at a loss for a moment. They had actually lost Tangjin. For the dog-headed people who were good at tracking, this was a great humiliation. After being defeated by Tangjin one after another, the leader of the dog-headed people was about to go crazy. It turned around in place for more than 10 times and even stuck its nose to the ground to sniff for a long time. Finally, it roughly determined the direction in which Tangjin had escaped. However, what gave it a headache was that there were dozens of holes in the same direction. Only God knew which hole Tangjin had entered. The kobold leader had no choice but to send a few kobolds to each cave. He didn't hope to kill Tangjin. He only hoped that they could call out to him in time when they discovered him. This way, the kobolds nearby could rush over to help. No matter what, they had to get back the brain and Tangjin had to be brought back to be executed. The kobold leader's idea was good, but when the group of kobolds entered the tree hole, they realized that the inside of the tree hole was like a huge maze. Some of the passages overlapped, some were completely dead ends, and some had several forks as they walked. It didn't take long for the dog-headed people to lose their sense of direction. They began to frantically search for a path in the tunnel, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find the right direction. Before the dog-headed people's sense of smell recovered, they could only run around in this maze-like passage. Even if their sense of smell recovered, they might not be able to walk out of this maze-like passage. Not long after, the hoarse screams of the kobolds could be faintly heard. It was unknown what they had encountered. Tangjin slowly walked through the tunnel that was lit up by the fluorescent creatures. However, he did not relax his vigilance in the slightest. He had long discovered the strangeness of this tunnel. If he were to randomly scurry around, it was very likely that he would be lost in this tunnel and might not be able to exit it in his entire life. Tangjin had the map teleportation ability and did not need to worry that he would not be able to charge out. At this moment, he felt sad for those stubborn dog-headed people chasing him. He believed that they would definitely be like headless flies, randomly running and bumping around in the tunnel, right? Tangjin used the monster detector to scan the fluorescent creatures that were growing on the tunnel. He discovered that they were not monsters. Tangjin heaved a sigh of relief after knowing the exact result. If these fluorescent creatures that were everywhere were also monsters, then even if he had the ability to fly in the sky and burrow into the ground, it would be difficult for him to avoid being disturbed. The/W novel chapters are published on no/vel/bin.co/m. By relying on the heaven-defying function of the map, Tangjin could see all the passages within the displayed range and even the general scenery of the passages. With such an intuitive display, Tangjin began to distinguish the way forward from these giant worm-like holes. However, the range of his map was limited and the area of the withered tree stump was too large. He couldn't determine which passage was the way out. Just as Tangjin was trying to find a clue from the chaotic passage, two dog-headed people that appeared within the range of the map attracted his attention. This was because these two dog-headed people were currently in danger. An earthworm-like red-ringed worm suddenly emerged from the hole that was covered by the fluorescent creatures, and ruthlessly stabbed into the body of a dog-headed man. The dog-headed man who was attacked immediately stood still on the spot, as if a spell had been cast on him. The other dog-headed man saw that his companion had stopped and was about to ask, but he was also stabbed by a strange insect that suddenly appeared, and he froze on the spot. More and more strange insects crawled out from the walls and stabbed into the dog-headed men's bodies. It was as if the two dog-headed men were two marionettes that were controlled by the strange insects. The two hound-head men looked at each other and saw fear and panic in each other's eyes. However, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get out of their stiff state. Slowly, the dog-headed man felt that his body was full. Then, it felt as if something had been stuffed into his body, and the more it was stuffed, the more it felt. It even felt that its stomach was about to burst, and there seemed to be something in its throat that was about to come out. The two hound-head men couldn't see their own bodies, but they could see their companion's appearance. Then, they were horrified to find that their companion's body was gradually expanding, and it seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. The bellies of the two hound-head men seemed to have become as thin as cicadas' wings. One could even see the blood vessels on the skin and the intestines inside. Tangjin, who was observing the two kobolds through the map, saw the details of the entire process, causing his scalp to involuntarily turn numb. These worms seemed to have a strong numbing ability, but they could make their targets lose their ability to move immediately after being attacked. However, they were not planning to eat the kobolds, but were laying eggs inside their bodies. After Tangjin saw the strange insect pierce into the dog-headed man's body, its body slowly wriggled. Round insect eggs the size of ping-pong balls were squeezed out from the body of the passage and continuously injected into the dog-headed man's body. Every time 17 or 18 insect eggs were injected into the dog-headed man's body, it would fall to the outer wall of the passage like a deflating balloon, as if it was completely dead. However, there were more than 100 strange insects on the two dog-headed people's bodies. Hence, an endless stream of insect eggs was injected into the two dog-headed people's bodies. During this time, strange insects kept dying. By the time all the strange insects had been injected with eggs, the two hound-head men had turned into two round balls. They could not move and fell to the ground, becoming the hotbeds for the hatching of strange insects. A few strange insects with green skin slowly appeared. They swam near the head of the dog-headed man and inserted their tails into the dog-headed man's throat. Then, they seemed to excrete something. However, the dog-headed man, who was originally dying, immediately became energetic after the green insect's excrement entered his stomach. The dog-headed people seemed to want to get up and run away, but their bodies, which had been deformed to an exaggerated extent, could not make any movements. They could only look at each other's unrecognizable faces and feel the fear brought by the trembling and wriggling eggs in their bodies. They ate the excrement of the strange green insects to maintain their lives. Only when the eggs hatched and broke out of their bodies did the two dog-headed people have hope of being completely free. Tangjin took a deep breath as he looked at the two dog-headed people who wished they were dead. He took out the purple electric short sword and activated the adjustable Neurodevice type infrasonic wave generator again. A wave of death swept out toward his path. This type of infrasonic weapon could be adjusted to a suitable frequency based on real-time monitoring data so that it could kill the target to the greatest extent. Tangjin continued to move forward along the tunnel. The originally quiet and beautiful fluorescent tunnel suddenly became restless. Countless strange red insects suddenly appeared in the tunnel. Up, down, left, and right were these strange red insects that were constantly waving their limbs. They were stimulated to the point of constantly struggling madly, as if they wanted to escape. However, due to the insect eggs in their abdomens, they were firmly stuck in the holes and could not move. The strange insects that had no choice but to run became even crazier. They were like the tentacles of a group of monsters, tangling with each other with all their might. At the same time, a large amount of yellow-green liquid sprayed out from their heads, filling the tunnel with this disgusting mucus. The originally beautiful passage turned into a hellish scene in the blink of an eye. Tangjin used the monster detector and locked onto a red, strange insect that was struggling non-stop. Soon, a message popped up. Offspring of the mutated tree maggot of the mother tree, mother worm, a level 1 monster, a hybrid offspring of monsters. It usually feeds on fluorescent grass powder. After mating, it will sleep in the hole for up to 100 years. Its eggs will hatch in the body of the creature, and it will die immediately after laying eggs. Weakness, fear of the mother tree's SAP, death upon contact. Tangjin looked at the information of the monster in front of him and roughly guessed the origin of this strange insect. The giant remaining stump was originally called the mother tree. Before it was broken, there were no tree maggots. However, after the mother tree died, the trunk gradually dried up and petrified, and the SAP also evaporated. The tree maggots, which were afraid of the SAP, occupied the place and continued to multiply and grow by killing creatures that entered the place. While Tangjin was thinking, these mutated tree maggots had already exhausted their last bit of strength. The impact of the infrasonic wave had damaged their fragile internal organs. At this moment, they were limply hanging on the tunnel, as if they would die at any moment. After making sure that there were no mutated tree maggots in front of him, Tangjin carefully avoided the mucus on the ground and continued to explore forward. When he passed by a large pile of mucus, his mind moved slightly. He waved his hand and took out a container from the storage space, storing the extremely paralyzing mucus. Tangjin walked and stopped along the way. As long as he found a hole near the fluorescent grass, he would not hesitate to use infrasonic waves to sweep it clean to ensure that he would not be sneak attacked by these mutated tree maggots. Tangjin walked and stopped along the way. He did not know how long he had walked for. Finally, he found a large blank area on the map. When he took a closer look, he realized that he had unknowingly walked to the top of the tree stump. Tangjin's spirit was shaken. He immediately ran toward the exit. In the blink of an eye, his vision suddenly brightened. This was an extremely large field. The surroundings were filled with towering mother trees' damaged branches, which surrounded the area like mountain peaks. Only the middle was a wide open space. However, Tangjin's eyes slightly shrunk when he cast his gaze towards the center of the open space. He saw 4 to 5 tree maggots that had been enlarged countless times were dancing in the middle of the open space. Each of them was 4 to 5 meters thick and dozens of meters long. They seemed to have sensed Tangjin's appearance as they waved their hands in his direction. Occasionally, sticky liquid would drip from their heads. From time to time, tree maggots would spew out mucus from their mouths. Compared to the paralyzing ability of the descendants of tree maggots, the ancestors of these maggots were more terrifying because the mucus they spewed out was highly corrosive and could easily burn big holes in the ground. Perhaps it was because of the eggs in their abdomens, but these maggots were also unable to leave the holes of their hosts. They could only wave their limbs in vain, looking extremely ferocious and terrifying. Tangjin's eyes were fixed on these giant tree maggots. In a moment, the information of these giant tree maggots appeared in front of his eyes. Mother tree mutated maggot, fused as one, level 5 monster. Outer skin is extremely flexible. Originally a mother tree's loose soil earthworm. After being infected by the monster, it mutated and fed on the mother tree's trunk. Its weakness is in the center of its abdomen. It was obvious that the tunnels in the middle of the trunk were the work of these giant mutated tree maggots. For some unknown reason, their bodies had been fused together, turning them into a multi-headed monster. It was just that this way, their combat strength had increased a bit, making them even more difficult to deal with. Tangjin looked at the information of these mutated tree maggots and could not help but feel a headache. This was because these were the high-level monsters with the least threat he had seen so far. As long as one did not get close to their attack range, there would be no danger. However, as long as he could kill this level 5 monster, he could easily advance to a level 4 cultivator. This kind of temptation was hard for Tangjin to give up. Tangjin stared at the mutated tree maggot for a while and fiercely gritted his teeth. Wealth comes from danger. I'll do it! Thinking of this, Tangjin immediately took out his rifle and aimed at the tree maggot. He began to fire a test shot. As the crisp sound of the gunshot rang out, the bullets continuously hit the huge body of the tree maggot, but they did not cause any damage to it. However, the tree maggot was extremely furious by Tangjin's actions. It kept spitting corrosive liquid at him at a rapid speed. Tangjin quickly dodged when he saw this, so as to prevent this terrifying liquid from contaminating his body. Seeing that the rifle's attack was ineffective, Tangjin took out the RPG, hoping that this 40mm caliber weapon with a 300 to 400mm depth of penetration could kill the mutated tree maggot. Boom! The rocket shot toward the mutated tree maggot and landed on one of the parts of the maggot's body in the blink of an eye. The violent explosion echoed throughout the whole Dead Tree Pile Valley. The hit mutated tree maggot couldn't make a sound, but its violent writhing indicated that the rocket had hurt it. A huge wound appeared on its body, and mucus was slowly flowing out, mixed with pieces of internal organs. Tang Jin's eyes were fixed on the injured mutated tree maggot as he carefully observed its wound. After a while, his expression became serious because he could clearly see that the wound was healing rapidly. In fact, in just a few minutes, the wound caused by the rocket had completely healed. The mutated tree maggot, whose wound had recovered, hated Tang Jin to the core. It frantically spat corrosive liquid at him, as if it was determined to completely corrode him into a residue. Tang Jin had no choice but to retreat into the passage to hide. FIDDEU UPTS on NOV/E/LN.com. What kind of monster was this? How could he kill it? Tang Jin looked at the mutated tree maggot that was almost unkillable and felt slightly troubled in his heart. According to the monster detector, the fatal spot of these mutated tree maggots was in the center of their abdomens. However, their abdomens were hidden in the holes where they were. If Tang Jin wanted to attack, he had to find a way to get them out of the holes. However, the reason why Tang Jin was able to attack the mutated tree maggot so easily was because it was stuck in the hole and couldn't leave. Once the maggot regained its freedom, it would definitely chase after Tang Jin crazily. Therefore, he must not let it leave through the hole. Tang Jin thought hard. In the face of such a difficult mutated tree maggot, his heart beat a retreat. Why don't we leave this place for the time being and come back to deal with it after we find a way to deal with these tree maggots? Yes, that's it. Jin Tang was about to leave when the phone around his neck suddenly vibrated. He immediately stopped and turned to look at the mutated tree maggot. Gently stroking his violently vibrating phone, Tang Jin looked at the mutated tree maggot that was still dancing crazily and muttered to himself, "To be able to make my phone vibrate so violently, it's obvious that there's a great treasure on this mutated tree maggot. In that case, I'm definitely going to kill this level 5 monster." This kind of mutated tree maggot had an extremely strong self-healing ability. It was impossible to kill it by force. At the very least, it was almost impossible with Tang Jin's current ability. The infrasonic weapon might be able to injure it, but it was impossible to kill it because it had an extremely strong recovery ability. The Deathlight weapon could only deal a single blow, which could deal massive damage, but it was still unable to kill it. This was because it had extremely powerful recovery abilities. As for guns, weapons, and flames, Tang Jin didn't even consider them. To this level 5 monster, they were just like tickles. If one wanted to kill such an abnormal monster, one had to injure its foundation or find another way. Otherwise, if an accident were to occur and this monster escaped from the hole under his body, Tang Jin did not believe that he would be able to escape in one piece from its pursuit. Tang Jin scratched his head and thought hard. His gaze inadvertently swept across a dead red strange insect on the ground. A thought flashed in his mind. A moment later, he stood up with a contemplative expression. He teleported back to his original world and headed straight for the store. Half an hour later, Tang Jin was teleported back. He got up and went straight down the tunnel. Because the cleared passage was easy to recognize, Tang Jin's speed was very fast. It didn't take long for 5 lost kobolds to appear on his map. They were running around in the passage. Tang Jin's face revealed a happy expression. He immediately identified the path that would allow him to approach the dog-headed people from the map and quickly approached it. The 5 hound-head men were looking around in panic. They had 7 companions before, but after encountering the strange insect, 2 of them were strung up like marionettes. The 5 of them dodged in time and avoided the attack of the strange red insect. The crazy and bold kobolds had been confused by the maze-like passage after entering it. Now that they had encountered the strange red insects, they were trembling with fear. The exhausted and hungry kobold warriors were starting to regret coming here. However, they didn't expect that a greater danger was yet to come. Tangjin suddenly appeared behind these dog-headed people. Without waiting for them to react, a large number of 3-inch steel nails stained with the strange red insect's mucus was scattered over from all directions. With Tangjin's current cultivation, these 3-inch steel nails that he had just bought could be turned into killing weapons in his hands. However, his goal was not to kill these dog-headed people. Instead, he wanted to subdue and capture them. Under Tangjin's deliberate control of his strength, these steel nails only pierced an inch into the dog-headed people's bodies before all the force was removed. At the same time, the red paralyzing mucus on the nails began to take effect, causing the 5 dog-headed people, who were covered in nails, to fall to the ground like statues. Tangjin slowly walked over. He took a look at the dog-headed man, who was unable to even move his eyes. The dog-headed man could only shoot out flames of anger and fear from his eyes. He clicked his tongue and repeatedly praised, "The paralyzing effect of the tree maggot's mucus is surprisingly good. The dog-headed people who were still alive and kicking a moment ago have become 5 dead dogs. I must get more for backup later, and then paralyze all the puppies in the entire dog-headed people tribe." Tangjin deliberately used the dog-headed people's language to speak. The 5 dog-headed people were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. However, they were unable to vent their anger. Only by looking at their trembling lips could they judge how much they wanted to bite Tangjin to death. After deliberately angering the dog-headed people, Tangjin tied the 5 of them up with a rope and placed it on his shoulder. He then quickly ran towards the empty space at the top of the tree stump. After reaching the top of the tree stump, Tangjin threw the 5 dog-headed people into the passage and poured a mouthful of the strange insect's mucus into each of them. He then patted the dust off his body with relief and ran down again. After more than 10 minutes, Tangjin returned once again. He carried 3 bloody dog-headed men that had been pierced by steel nails and threw them on the ground. He repeated the same trick and gulped down a mouthful of strange insect's mucus one by one before leaving in a hurry. As time slowly passed, more and more kobolds were caught by Tangjin. When Tangjin returned for the last time, he dragged the kobold leader, who was covered in steel nails and had a bloody nose and a swollen face, and caught all the kobolds who were lucky enough to not die after entering the passage. The anger in Tangjin's heart was finally vented out as he looked at the dog-headed people lying all over the tunnel. He was in a miserable state after being chased by this group of people earlier. Unfortunately, the tables had turned. Now that they were alone, he had completely annihilated them without any effort. F***CK, you're crazy. You want to eat me and peel my skin. Now I want to see who's going to be the one to peel whose skin. Tangjin kicked the kobold leader beside him and asked with a teasing expression as he met its devouring gaze. When they met the kobold leader earlier, it actually dodged Tangjin's steel nails and then scolded Tangjin. It then waved its short spear and wanted to die with Tangjin. Once the dog-headed people who didn't care about their lives went crazy, their combat strength was indeed very terrifying. Unfortunately, their opponent was Tangjin. In the end, after a few rounds of fighting, the dog-headed man leader fell into Tangjin's trap and was numbed to the ground by a bunch of steel nails. Tangjin rode on the kobold leader's body and gave it a beating before he dragged it back. After glancing at the dozens of dog-headed people who were at the mercy of others, Tangjin turned his eyes to the mutated tree maggot in the middle of the open space. He narrowed his eyes and pondered for a while, then picked up a dog-headed man in each hand and rushed towards the center of the open space. The mutated maggot sensed Xintang's arrival and immediately began to spit corrosive liquid. Xintang dodged quickly while approaching the mutated maggot. When the mutated maggot's body was at the edge of his range, he threw the 2 kobolds at the mutated maggot with a roar. Plop! The two hound-head men smashed into the mutated tree maggot's body and fell to the ground. Tang Jin quickly retreated while observing the mutated tree maggot's reaction. After feeling that it had been hit, the mutated tree maggot, which had no vision, immediately reacted. After confirming that it was two creatures with its special sensing ability, the mutated tree maggot hesitated for a moment. Then, a few mutated tree maggots that were 1 inch thick reached out from the bottom of the giant mutated tree maggot and stabbed into the dog-headed man's body. Tang Jin, who was observing this scene, felt joy in his heart. It seemed that his plan had already succeeded by half. Through the monster detector, Tang Jin had already determined that these giant tree maggots that were constantly waving around were actually a whole entity. In other words, they were a monster. Then, the tiny tree maggots that were sticking out from under them should also be a part of their main body. Looking at the movements of these tree maggots, it was clear that they were laying eggs in the dog-headed man's body. According to the habits of tree maggots, once they finished laying eggs, they would immediately die. Tang Jin wanted to bet that this huge mutated maggot had the same characteristic and would die after laying its eggs. Perhaps it was because its descendants had blocked all the upstream passages, so the mutated maggot didn't have the chance to lay eggs. Now that he had sent the dog-headed man to its door, it couldn't wait to lay its eggs. Find updates on n/v/elben.co/m. Such a huge tree maggot might have laid countless times more eggs than its offspring, but Tang Jin had dozens of dog-headed people in his hands. He was not afraid that he would not be able to squeeze it dry. The mutated tree maggot happily laid eggs in the dog-headed people's bodies, like a pervert who had been abstinent for many years and suddenly got a beautiful woman. He vented his anger to his heart's content, and the bodies of the two dog-headed people swelled up at a speed visible to the naked eye. Tang Jin didn't dare to waste any more time. He immediately returned to the tunnel, picked up 2 more kobolds, and threw them in front of the tree maggots. It just so happened that the 2 kobolds from before had already expanded to their limits. The slender tree maggots immediately changed their target and stabbed their heads into the bodies of the kobolds that had just been thrown. Tang Jin kept repeating the actions of running, throwing the dog-headed man, then returning, and throwing the dog-headed man again. At the same time, he was also carefully observing the performance of the giant tree maggot. He found that when there were 10 round kobolds lying on the ground, the giant mutated tree maggot was a little listless. When there were 20, the mutated tree maggot was no longer willing to pay attention to him, and the range of its corrosive liquid was reduced by half. By the time the 30 kobolds laid eggs, the mutated tree maggot had become soft and weak, and it hung limply on the ground, taking up a large area. Tang Jin was overjoyed when he saw this. He threw all the kobolds over in one breath. However, when he threw the last few kobolds, he tied the bodies of the kobolds with the high military explosives that Ivanov had gotten. When the last dog-headed man was injected with the egg, the giant mutated tree maggot was so weak that it was almost on the verge of death. It could be seen that even though it had become extremely huge after the mutation, it still couldn't change the habits passed down in its blood. It was impossible for Tang Jin to wait for the giant tree maggot to die naturally. If that happened, it would mean that all his efforts would be in vain. He had to take advantage of the moment when it was still breathing to kill it completely. Only then could he obtain the experience points to level up. According to the mutated tree maggot's current state, Tang Jin seemed to be able to move forward and kill it with his bare hands. However, out of careful consideration, Tang Jin still chose to use explosives to open up a path. It was better to kill it directly. If it didn't die from the explosion, he could also take the opportunity to kill it. Otherwise, if the mutated tree maggot still had the strength to make a dying blow, Tang Jin would definitely suffer a great loss. As Tang Jin gently pressed the button, an earth-shaking explosion suddenly sounded. The power of the high military explosives was extremely strong. A majestic wave of air spread in all directions. Smoke and dust billowed, and the echo within the stump valley did not stop for a long time. Tangjin dodged the blast wave while observing the mutated tree maggot's situation. The mutated tree maggot was indeed at the end of its life. It let the shockwave of the explosion tear its limbs into countless pieces, and its mucus and flesh flew all over the sky, but it did not struggle at all. Tangjin's heart tightened when he saw this. Could it be that the mutated tree maggot had already died before he detonated the explosives? Just as the doubt in his heart rose, an incomparably abundant energy filled his 4 limbs and 100 bones. The feeling of his cultivation increasing by 1 level was so obvious that it gave Tangjin the illusion that he could collapse a mountain with a single punch. It seemed like he had already advanced to rank 4. Level 4 cultivation was already considered to be among the experts in the nearby area. Their strength was enough to crush 99% of the cultivators. Forcefully waving his fist, a happy smile appeared on the corner of Tangjin's mouth. After the smoke and dust had slightly subsided, he immediately rushed straight to the center of the stump valley. The tree stump valley that had been swept clean by the wind had now become a mess. There were broken flesh and disgusting corrosive liquid everywhere, making the ground full of potholes. From time to time, broken dog-headed people's corpses would appear. They looked broken beyond recognition, and their internal organs and white bug eggs were scattered on the ground. They were still slowly wriggling. The kobold leader had not been killed by the explosion. It was struggling with half of its body. The intestines that had been dragged far away had insect eggs attached to them. They also scattered with the blood. After seeing Tangjin, the kobold leader's eyes seemed to be dazed for a moment. Then, he bared his sharp teeth and fiercely looked at Tangjin. Bang! Tangjin slowly retracted his rifle. He looked at the kobold leader whose head had been blown off and shook his head without any expression. The place where the giant mutated tree maggot had become a big pit. The limbs of the mutated tree maggot on the ground had all been torn apart, revealing the remains of its abdomen. This level 5 mutated tree maggot was extremely powerful and had an extremely strong self-healing ability. If Tangjin had not lured it to lay eggs according to its habits, which eventually led to its defensive capabilities declining to its limit, these explosives might have only been able to cause serious injuries to it. It would still have the ability to counterattack. Tangjin looked at the big pit in front of him. The mutated tree maggot's remaining limbs had long been shattered, but Tangjin could still clearly see that a slender chain was firmly locked below the mutated tree maggot's abdomen, making it unable to move. The chain was only as thick as a thumb, shining with an emerald green luster, not stained with any dirt, and looked very beautiful. Tangjin came to a sudden realization. No wonder the mutated maggot was unable to escape from the hole despite being so strong, and the corrosive liquid it spat out was extremely abnormal. It was actually locked down by the chain. As soon as he thought about the power of the corrosive liquid spat out by the mutated tree maggot, Tangjin was sure that this chain was definitely not an ordinary item. Otherwise, it would be impossible to lock this mutated tree maggot because the mucus secreted by the mutated tree maggot was also highly corrosive. If an ordinary iron chain came into contact with it, it would quickly corrode and break. He could try to take the chains away later. He couldn't miss such a good thing. 7 sit envelb/n. C/m for L test vels. Tangjin retracted his gaze from the chain and looked at the mutated tree maggot's body. After seeing the chain and the information displayed by the monster detector, Tangjin guessed that there was more than one mutated tree maggot that was locked by the chain. However, as time went by, the bodies of the mutated tree maggots that secreted corrosive mucus began to merge after being trapped. In the end, for some unknown reason, the mutated tree maggots combined into a multi-headed maggot until today. The phone's vibration didn't stop. Tangjin looked at the pile of mushy meat in the pit. He endured the rancid smell and carefully avoided the corrosive liquid before jumping in. Feeling that the item that caused the phone to vibrate was in the abdomen of the mutated tree maggot, Tangjin could only pinch his nose and take out a spear-shaped demon weapon from the storage space. He began to rummage through the mutated tree maggot's stomach. With the stirring of the demon soldier's spear, the mutated maggot's intestines and the remaining eggs were stirred up, making Tangjin so disgusted that he almost vomited. It was impossible to search randomly. After all, the abdomen of the mutated maggot was more than 10 meters in diameter, so it was easy to hide an item. Tangjin turned his head and took a deep breath. He then activated the infrared X-ray skin option in the all-round data combat interface. As the application was launched, the view in front of Tangjin immediately changed. At the same time, an eye-catching thing appeared in front of him. It was in the middle of the giant tree maggot's abdomen. It seemed to be the reason why the phone was vibrating wildly. Since he had a target, the following matters were much easier to handle. Tangjin used the demon weapon spear to aim at that position and flicked a few times. He felt that his hand had become heavy. After confirming that it was that item, his arms fiercely clenched. Who? A half-meter square metal box was picked out by Tangjin from the wreckage of the mutated tree maggot and fell heavily to the ground. As soon as it came into contact with the air, the dirt on the box immediately slid to the ground as if it had been washed away, revealing the clean and bright box body. Tangjin kept his demon weapon spear and slowly walked forward to take a look. The box had a beautiful and strange shape. It was made of a purple metal with golden stars in it. It felt like a young girl's skin when one touched it. It was warm and comfortable. Tangjin took out an incomparably sharp purple lightning short sword and slashed at the box. However, he discovered that only an extremely shallow scratch was left behind. From this, one could see the toughness of this box. There was a messy pattern on the top of the metal box. Tangjin looked at it for a while before he discovered that this pattern was actually a movable puzzle of a slide. The answer was obvious. If he wanted to open the box, he had to piece the sliding block on the box into a complete pattern. Otherwise, he would never be able to open the box. It was obviously very difficult to break such a tough box by external force, and it might also damage the items inside, so the only way was to restore the scattered puzzle pieces. Tangjin felt a headache as he looked at the messy patterns on the box. He was not good at this at all. If he were to crack it, who knew how long it would take? He might not be able to crack it in his entire life. Tangjin shook his head and thought for a while. Then, he tentatively opened the application store to look for an application that could help him. After searching for a while, Tangjin finally found the application he needed in the entertainment option. All-Purpose Entertainment Game Cracker. After activation, it can scan and analyze the content of all kinds of entertainment games, mainly chess and cards. It can be cracked instantly, and all your trump cards can be seen at a glance. You will be guaranteed to win every battle. You can also receive guidance tips at the same time. Download amount, 1,000 gold coins. The price of entertainment-related applications was generally not high. Even this kind of application, which could allow one to become rich after using it, only charged 1,000 gold coins. Compared to those applications that easily cost hundreds of thousands of gold coins, it was simply cheap. In the past, Tangjin might have felt heartache over spending 1,000 gold coins, but now, Tangjin, who had just robbed a dog-headed man and had a small amount of savings, had already chosen to download and install it without hesitation. As the application was activated, Tangjin felt a light beam shoot out from his phone. After scanning the box, a bunch of words popped up in front of him. Scan complete. Target is a sliding block game. To perfectly restore the original art, you need to move it 980 times. Do you want to start the tutorial? Tangjin selected the activation guide and immediately discovered that a pattern on the edge of the box was marked with a red light. Tangjin stretched out his hand and moved it a little. Immediately after, the second pattern was marked with a red light. Tangjin only needed to move the slide according to the instructions and he would be able to perfectly restore it. With the help of this application, playing this puzzle game was really simple. Tangjin's speed became faster and faster as he moved the slide one step at a time. Not long after, he moved the last picture to its original position. Ka-ba. A faint sound of metal contracting was heard, reminding Tangjin that he had successfully opened the box. However, Tangjin was not in a hurry to open the box. Instead, he was attracted by the scene in front of him and looked at it seriously. The main body of the pattern was a huge tree that reached the sky and the earth. There was no doubt that it was the withered stump under his feet, the giant tree that was originally called the mother tree. In the picture, the mother tree was luxuriant, and under its feet was a forest that stretched endlessly. It looked thriving, and everywhere was a green that was full of vitality. There were many creatures living on the mother tree. They were dressed in beautiful clothes and had exquisite looks, as if they were no different from humans. The only difference was that their ears were slightly pointed, similar to the elves that Tangjin had seen in movies. From the images, these elegant creatures were living happily, but for some unknown reason, the mother tree withered and broke, these creatures disappeared, and the mother tree's remains were occupied by strange insects. Perhaps he would be able to find the answer he needed in this box. Tangjin carefully went around to the back and opened the metal box. There was no abnormality. After going around to the front, Tangjin found that the box was actually filled with books bound with green leaves and a small purple gem box. After spending so much effort, I finally got a box of books. Hee, it seems that the saying that knowledge is wealth is true everywhere. Tangjin helplessly shook his head. He picked up a green leaf book and took a look. He could not help but let out an S sound as the glow in his eyes grew brighter. With the help of the Universal Language Translator, Tangjin could easily read and understand the contents of the book. It turned out that the book had a very detailed introduction on how to use the mother tree's power to cast a divine spell to promote the growth of plants. It also explained in detail how to sense the mother tree's power, how to cast spells in the language of the tree spirits, how to strengthen and improve plants, and so on. Tangjin could not help but click his tongue in wonder when he saw this. He did not expect the mother tree to actually have such a magical ability. The race known as the tree spirit tribe that lived around the mother tree completely relied on the mother tree's power to live without worry for food and clothing. It was a pity that the mother tree had been broken and destroyed. It was really a waste of good things. After putting down the book, Tangjin picked up another green leaf book and found that it was a secret book that introduced how to use the power of the mother tree to cultivate a powerful archery skill. As Tangjin read on, he suddenly realized that many of the things recorded in these books could not be separated from the mother tree's participation. It could be said that the mother tree was the root of everything. Once the mother tree was gone, the tree spirit tribe would become useless. It was no wonder that after the mother tree was broken, the tree spirit clan disappeared completely. In Tangjin's opinion, they were like the parasites of the mother tree. Without the skin, the hair could not attach itself. It was reasonable for them to decline and perish. Therefore, the tree spirit tribe became and fell because of the mother tree. It was only because they were too dependent on the mother tree that this situation occurred. However, if a race other than the tree spirit tribe obtained the mother tree and used it reasonably, it would be a blessing instead of a disaster. After roughly reading through these books, Tangjin's gaze once again turned towards the small box that was placed alone. He mused for a moment before slowly opening the small box with an expectant mood. Tangjin had a guess in his heart. The answer would soon be revealed. The purple gem box was opened, revealing the items inside. It was a multicolored stone that was slowly floating in the air, a blood book that seemed to be made of human skin, and a gorgeous green ring. Tangjin's heart wildly beat when he saw these three items. He extended his hand and picked up the human skin blood book to take a look. Get latest level CHDRs on NVE/LBJ/N.C/M. I'm the Lord of the Mother Tree Tower City, Yuelang Feng. When you see this letter written in my skin, I believe you've killed the mutated tree maggot and obtained the wealth I left for the descendants of the tree spirit race. My children and grandchildren, I am an incompetent city lord. Our mother tree, Lu Cheng, has raised us for thousands of years, but in the end, it was destroyed and broken in my hands. So, the moment Lu Cheng's mother tree was broken, I should have died to atone for my sins. On the day the mother tree was broken, the monster, which had been eyeing the mother tree, took the opportunity to launch an attack on all the tree spirits. The tribesmen who had lost the protection of the mother tree were killed by the monster's claws. I've killed countless monsters, and I'm covered in wounds. I'm only left with one breath. But I can't die yet, because I have to kill the main culprits that caused the mother tree to break. Those mutated tree maggots, those damn demons, they gnawed off the roots of the mother tree and hollowed out the trunk, causing the mother tree to wither and break, implicating the innocent people. So, I swallowed the forbidden medicine, and my strength instantly skyrocketed. However, I only had 1 month left to live, but to me, this was enough. After that, I found the mutated tree maggots and subdued them after a bloody battle. However, when I realized that they were originally useful for loosening the soil on the roots of the mother tree, I suddenly realized that I was wrong. In fact, I was not the only one who was wrong. The entire tree spirit race was wrong. As time went by, we indulged in the protection of the mother tree tower, singing and dancing all day without having to worry about food and clothing. Unconsciously, we became extremely undisciplined. We only paid attention to poetry and dance, hated war and killing, and did not care about anything other than ourselves. So, the monsters gradually invaded the roots of the mother tree. We didn't know that the monsters infected the beneficial worms of the loose soil and turned them into mutated tree maggots. The most ridiculous thing is that we still didn't know that the mutated tree maggots had already eaten up the mother tree. We only know that on the day the mother tree is broken, there will be a grand ball. Therefore, the tree spirits deserve their miserable situation today, and they could not blame anyone. When I thought of this, I no longer had any reason to kill these mutated maggots. However, since they had made a mistake, they must atone for it. So I decided to let them guard the inheritance of the tree spirits, which was the foundation of the mother tree's tower and the way to use the mother tree's power. In order to get the heritage treasure, you must pass through the trunk passage guarded by the descendants of the mutated tree maggots. They will attack any creature other than the tree spirit race. Also, I have tamed these giant mutated tree maggots. They will protect the heritage treasure. Once a tree spirit bloodline gets close, they will self-destruct and send the treasure to the tree spirit race. This is a defensive measure that I've specially set up in order to wait for the arrival of the tree spirit bloodline so that I can rebuild the mother tree city and restore it to its former glory. It's a divine weapon of the tree spirit race, called the tree spirit chain. The spell to unlock it is the keep and lock in the tree spirit language. Every tree spirit can use it easily with the ring I left behind. By the time you read this letter, I would have already died. Please take this as a warning and don't repeat the same mistakes. Mother Tree, City Lord of Lu City, Yuelang Peak, final stroke. Tangjin let out a long sigh of relief after seeing this. He slowly put away the wool that Yuelang Feng had written on his skin. Then, he picked up the ring from the inside and used the Universal Language Translator to shout in the tree spirit language, "Take it." A green light flashed past. The tree spirit chain, which was tens of meters long after being unfurled, pounced towards Tangjin. At the same time, it rapidly shrank. In the end, it actually became circles of thin green lines that twined around the ring. After Tang Jin touched the ring, he put away the brilliant cornerstone of the tower. According to the content of Yueling Peak's will, as long as this cornerstone was sacrificed and the tower was built, a mother tree could be cultivated again. In other words, the mother tree was a special building, and the tree spirits were the residents. Well, truckers, that's all for this part. See you all in the next video.